For centuries, the vast Pacific Ocean has hidden secrets that continue to captivate our imagination. Among them is the legend of Mu, a lost continent said to have been home to an advanced civilization, brilliant, artistic, and in perfect harmony with nature, whose knowledge may have rivaled anything in recorded history. Did Mu truly exist? Or is it a fragment of ancient myths scattered across Polynesia and the Americas? Whether fact or legend, this story challenges the way we see our past and asks a question that lingers. Could the roots of human civilization run deeper than we ever imagined? Join us as we navigate the space between history and myth, guided by science, archaeology, and the timeless pull of human curiosity. Welcome to Channel. If you're drawn to stories that live in the shadows, between what we know and what's been lost, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and what time it is for you. Let's watch our global map light up together. Beneath the skin, in every pulse of your heartbeat, there is a record of your past. One that might not be entirely human. For generations, we've looked to history books, to archaeology, to the fragments of bone and pottery that seem to tell us where we came from. But sometimes a whisper slips through, a suggestion so bold it feels almost impossible, that the blood running in our veins carries traces from somewhere, or perhaps someone beyond our accepted lineage. And in the search for humanity's true beginnings, this theory, strange, daring, and stubbornly persistent, refuses to fade away. It speaks of a mother civilization called Mu, a place so ancient it predates the ruins of Egypt, the myths of Atlantis, and even the first river valleys of Mesopotamia. A place, some claim, from which we truly emerged. The idea did not begin in the grand halls of universities, nor in the marble archives of great cities. It started in the 19th century, in the restless mind of a man named Augustus Le Plongeon. He was an archaeologist by trade, though the word carried a different weight back then, a mix of adventurer, linguist, and detective. His passion was the Yucatan Peninsula, where dense jungles concealed the monumental stone cities of the Maya. At the time, most scholars agreed that Egypt held the crown as humanity's first great civilization. But Le Plongeon was certain the Maya were older, that their culture was not born in isolation. And as he dug into Mayan texts, carved glyphs, and painted codices, he found something unexpected, references, he believed, to a land long vanished beneath the sea. They called it Mu. Le Plongeon's claims were radical enough to unsettle his peers. He suggested that the Maya were descendants of Mu's refugees, survivors of a catastrophic event that sank their homeland into the depths. But when pressed, he could not point to where Mu had once stood, nor offer the kind of physical proof his critics demanded. Without tangible evidence, his theory drifted into obscurity, stored away with other legends that dared to challenge the accepted order. And there it might have stayed, if not for another man who stumbled across the whispers and decided they were worth more than a passing thought. His name was James Churchward. British by birth, soldier by circumstance, and wanderer by inclination, Churchward found himself in India in the late 1800s, stationed far from home and drawn into the labyrinthine world of temples, traditions, and guarded secrets. One day, he claimed, a high-ranking temple priest took him aside and revealed an object no outsider was meant to see. From a hidden recess came a set of stone tablets, weathered, sun-baked, and surprisingly light for their size, for they were formed of a clay stone composite. Across their surfaces ran lines of intricate symbols in a language unlike any Churchward had encountered. The priest told him this was the Nagamaya language, a tongue so ancient that only two others in all of India still understood it. It was, the priest insisted, the language of Mu. Struck by the enormity of what he was holding, Churchward made a bargain. If the priest would teach him the language, he would help preserve the tablets, storing them in conditions that would keep them safe from time and weather. The priest agreed, and so began years of painstaking study, symbol by symbol, until Churchward could read what he believed to be the oldest human story ever recorded. What unfolded, he later wrote, was not just a tale of kings and wars, but of creation itself. The tablets spoke of the birth of the earth and the rise of a great continent, Mu, home to a people called the Nakal. They were not scattered tribes, but a single, unified civilization, bound by one government and one faith. Churchward described them as a black race, his words, superior in many respects to modern humanity, not in arrogance, but in their harmonious mastery of life. He painted Mu as a thriving world, with over 64 million inhabitants spread across 7 major cities and colonies on distant shores. Vast rivers carved the land, hills rolled toward the horizon, and plains stretched under a sky that saw the same stars we see now, though perhaps with different eyes. But the heart of the mystery lay in location. Churchward placed Mu in the Pacific Ocean, stretching east to west from the Marianas to Easter Island, and north to south from Hawaii to Mangaia. By his estimation, it was larger than South America. If that image seems impossible, remember, this was before modern sonar mapping of the ocean floor, before tectonic theory had reshaped our understanding of continents. To his readers in the 1920s, it was a vision both breathtaking and plausible. An empire of islands and fertile plains, erased from maps but preserved in clay. Yet for every wonder in Churchward's account, there was a question that refused to be ignored. If Mu had flourished for tens of thousands of years, where had it gone? His answer was as sudden as it was catastrophic. Around 12,000 years ago, he wrote, a chain of volcanic eruptions and earthquakes shattered the land. In a single night, the great continent broke apart and sank into the abyss, swallowed by 50 million square miles of water. The survivors, those who managed to flee in time, carried fragments of their knowledge to the corners of the earth. From these fragments, new civilizations rose, bearing echoes of Mu's language, its architecture, and its myths. To skeptics, it was all too convenient, an entire story resting on tablets no one else had seen, a disaster so total it left no geological trace. But the allure of the idea was undeniable. Even as historians rolled their eyes, other researchers and treasure hunters found themselves drawn into the puzzle. In time, Churchward's narrative would be bolstered by other discoveries, like the tablets unearthed in Mexico by William Niven, their markings curiously similar to the Nagamaya script. But in those first moments, it was still a solitary voice telling a story most experts didn't want to hear. And so, the legend of Mu stood at a crossroads, half buried in skepticism, half illuminated by fascination. Was it a real place, a cradle of humanity lost to the sea? Or was it a tapestry woven from misread symbols, the dreams of two men separated by oceans and decades, but joined in their belief that our past is far stranger than we dare to admit? To walk further into the story is to leave behind the comfort of what we think we know, and to step into a time when the world might have looked very different, and when the first humans, or perhaps something like humans, called a vanished land their home. If the story had ended there, with a single set of tablets in a locked Indian temple, perhaps it would have been dismissed entirely. Another colorful myth to entertain those who collect such things. But as the years passed, strange fragments began to surface, as if the past itself were unwilling to let go of this forgotten chapter. In 1921, decades after Churchward's claimed discovery, a mineralogist and archaeologist named William Niven was digging in the ground of San Miguel Amantla, near Mexico City. Niven was no stranger to unearthing the unexpected. His career had taken him deep into abandoned mines and overgrown ruins. But what he found here went far beyond gemstones or relics. He uncovered over 100 carved stone tablets, their surfaces etched with characters in an unrecognizable script. To most, they were just oddities, perhaps the work of an unknown pre-Columbian people. But to Churchward, they were something else entirely. When the two men compared notes, Churchward insisted the markings matched the Naga Maya language he had learned in India, the same script said to originate in Mu. If this was true, it implied a cultural connection between ancient Mexico and a vanished Pacific homeland thousands of miles away, a connection Orthodox history could not explain. Critics demanded a simpler answer: coincidence, misinterpretation, or even fabrication. And yet, the coincidences began to pile up in uncomfortable ways. For those willing to look, the Pacific seemed to hold more than just water and volcanic islands. There were whispers of unnatural structures on the ocean floor, ridges and formations too sharply geometric to be the work of erosion alone. In an age before deep-sea submersibles, such claims were impossible to verify. But they lingered, fueling the notion that perhaps Mu's bones still lay beneath the waves. Churchward's most famous piece of physical proof wasn't underwater at all. It stood in plain view, on a remote volcanic island thousands of miles from any major continent, Rapa Nui, known to the outside world as Easter Island. Scattered across its grassy slopes stood the moai, massive stone statues, each with a head disproportionately large compared to its body, their features carved with an almost austere solemnity. Some weighed over 80 tons. Some towered more than 30 feet into the air. Archaeologists dated their construction between the 13th and 16th centuries, crediting the island's Polynesian inhabitants, the Rapa Nui people. The statues, they explained, were built to honor ancestors. But when visitors asked the elders how such enormous stones had been moved from the quarry at Reino Raraku to their resting places around the island, the answers slipped into the territory of legend. The statues had walked there. Of course, no serious scholar believed the moai literally strolled across the landscape. The most accepted modern explanation comes from researchers Terry Hunt and Carl Lippo, who demonstrated that a coordinated team could rock a statue forward in an upright position using ropes in a way that might look like walking from a distance. Another theory suggested the statues were laid horizontally on wooden rollers and dragged, a method that, while plausible, would have required vast amounts of timber, a resource the island did not have in abundance. Churchward favored a different answer entirely, that the builders possessed a kind of lost spiritual or technological power capable of moving massive stones without physical force in the way we understand it today. Why such a fixation on Easter Island? Because, as Churchward saw it, Rapa Nui lay within the boundaries of where Mu supposedly stood. If the island's people had indeed inherited even fragments of knowledge from a drowned motherland, it might explain not just the statue's scale, but the cultural drive to create them. And if that was true, it begged another question. How many other civilizations around the world might carry the fingerprints of Mu, hidden in plain sight? That question leads inevitably to the pyramids. Not just the Great Pyramid of Giza, which dominates the Egyptian desert with a mathematical precision that still astonishes modern engineers, but the pyramids of Teotihuacan in Mexico, and the lesser-known but equally intriguing pyramid structures in China's Shaanxi province. Built thousands of years apart, in regions separated by continents and oceans, they share core geometric principles, stepped layers, cardinal alignment, and monumental scale. Mainstream history attributes these similarities to convergent development, different cultures independently arriving at the same architectural solution for ceremonial or political purposes. But to Churchward, and to those who found his ideas compelling, the similarities were evidence of a shared origin, a blueprint carried across the globe by survivors of Mu. Here, the theories branch into even stranger territory. Some propose that the pyramids, far from being mere tombs or temples, served as energy hubs, vast machines harnessing forces we have yet to rediscover. This notion places Mu not only as a cultural motherland, but as the cradle of a technological sophistication rivaling, or even surpassing, our own. In such a scenario, the loss of Mu would have been more than a humanitarian tragedy. It would have been the erasure of an entire branch of human capability. And then there is the question of who the people of Mu actually were. Churchward described them as human, but exceptional, possessing wisdom and unity that outshone later civilizations. Yet the deeper the conversation went, the more the line between human and something else began to blur. This is where the ancient astronaut hypothesis enters the frame. The idea suggests that beings from beyond Earth visited in the deep past, guiding the development of early humanity. Supporters point to myths and sacred texts across cultures. The Sumerian stories of Anunnaki, celestial beings who descended from the heavens. The Mayan Popol Vuh, which tells of sky gods who fashioned mankind. The Hindu Vedas, which speak of flying craft called Vimanas, piloted by divine figures. Could Mu have been their first landing place, their base of operations in shaping what would become the human race? For those inclined to believe, such speculation casts the knuckle not as ordinary humans, but as hybrids, the offspring of terrestrial and extraterrestrial union. In this telling, the story of Mu becomes more than just the rise and fall of a lost continent. It becomes the first chapter in a saga of contact, cooperation, and perhaps even conflict between worlds. And if that is true, the cataclysm that ended Mu might not have been purely geological. It could have been deliberate, an act meant to erase something from the earth forever. Whether one embraces these ideas or rejects them outright, the effect is the same. The mind drifts to the Pacific, to the idea of a vast land now hidden beneath the waves, and wonders what traces might still lie there. The official maps show nothing but water and scattered islands. But legends have a way of persisting, even when the facts seem thin. And sometimes, legends are the last clue left when history itself has been washed away. The Pacific at night is a restless expanse, a black mirror reflecting stars that seem close enough to touch. Somewhere in that vast darkness, Churchward believed, lay the bones of Mu, a continent that had once been a stage for the greatest civilization Earth had ever seen. To his followers, this was not just poetic language. They pictured real shorelines now buried under miles of water, ancient stone avenues where traders once walked, and temples whose spires pointed to constellations, as if to remind their builders of a shared cosmic origin. But in the world of science, belief alone is never enough. For Mu to be accepted as history rather than legend, it needed evidence carved in something harder than faith. Churchward's critics were quick to point out that the most damning absence was geological proof. The ocean floor of the Pacific, mapped in detail during the 20th century with sonar and satellite technology, shows no trace of a sunken landmass the size of Mu. According to plate tectonics, the study of how Earth's crust shifts and moves over time, continents cannot simply disappear in a single night. Even when land sinks, as parts of ancient coastlines have, the process leaves clear scars in the rock record. The Pacific Basin, geologists argued, bears no such wound. If Mu had truly been as vast as South America, its disappearance should have left behind unmistakable debris fields and irregular continental shelves. Yet this absence of proof did not silence everyone. Those sympathetic to the legend countered with a different interpretation. Perhaps Mu was never a massive continental plate in the first place. What if it was instead a network of large islands, volcanic in origin, spread across the Pacific? In such a case, a series of cataclysmic eruptions, much like the destruction of Krakatoa in 1883 but multiplied many times over, could have obliterated its core settlements. Erosion, earthquakes, and rising seas at the end of the last ice age might have done the rest, scattering its remnants into the deep, where they would be nearly impossible to recognize today. This idea gained traction among a small number of researchers who were already interested in other drowned lands from human prehistory. They pointed to Doggerland, the low-lying plain that once connected Britain to mainland Europe and was submerged around 8,000 years ago. They spoke of Sundaland, a massive land area in Southeast Asia that flooded when glacial ice melted roughly 12,000 years ago, the same timeline Churchward gave for Mu's destruction. Perhaps, they suggested, the Pacific legend was a cultural echo of real geological events that had taken place far from where Churchward believed. But the faithful were not content with geological speculation. They sought cultural and linguistic traces, threads that might link disparate peoples to a common ancestral home. Here, the similarities between Pacific Islander traditions and those of distant cultures were put forward as tantalizing clues. In the chants and oral histories of Polynesia, there are repeated references to homelands beyond the horizon, places that sank beneath the waves after the earth shook or the sea came in. To some, these were simply migration myths, symbolic stories explaining how people came to inhabit the islands they do today. To others, they were encoded memories of real disasters handed down across centuries, preserved in song long after the details of geography were lost. And then there were the symbols. Churchward claimed that certain motifs carved into the Niven tablets matched those found in temples from India to Mesoamerica. Spirals, step designs, and stylized solar discs, shapes that might mean nothing to a casual observer, were to him the fingerprints of a single source. He argued that these were not the result of coincidence, but of transmission. Survivors of Mu carrying their art, their religion, and their knowledge into the world, seeding the rise of later civilizations. Mainstream historians countered with a simpler explanation. Human beings, they noted, share the same physical and environmental constraints. Spirals appear in art because they appear in nature, in shells, in storms, in galaxies. Stepped structures arise because they are stable and easy to build. Sun symbols are universal because the sun is universal, the giver of life in every culture. Such shapes could have been independently in dozens of places without any contact at all. Still, there is a particular allure in imagining that far-flung cultures are connected by something more than coincidence. It turns the world into a puzzle with missing pieces, and each resemblance, each echo of Mu feels like the edge of a new discovery. This was the space in which Churchward thrived, weaving together scattered observations into a single grand narrative. In his telling, the fall of Mu was not just a historical event, but a trauma so profound it reshaped the trajectory of the entire human race. The cause of that trauma, he insisted, was sudden and total. He described volcanoes erupting in unison, earthquakes ripping apart the land, and whole cities toppling before their inhabitants could even flee. In this chaos, the Earth's crust beneath Mu fractured and the land dropped into what he called the Great Abyss of Fire. It was a scene meant to inspire awe and fear in equal measure. The image of an entire civilization erased in a single night is almost too large to comprehend. Perhaps that is why it has persisted. It is a story that lingers in the way great tragedies do, even without the proof to anchor it. Skeptics, of course, saw other possibilities. The cataclysm Churchward described could have been a metaphor, a mythologized version of events that took place over decades or centuries rather than hours. Cultures under stress often compress time in their oral histories, turning long struggles into singular moments of loss. A slow decline due to environmental change, resource depletion, or conflict might be remembered as a single terrible night when the land fell. In this reading, Mu's end is less about fire and brimstone and more about the complex, gradual unraveling that has ended so many civilizations. But for those invested in the legend, this was missing the point. The appeal of Mu was never just about proving it existed. It was about what it represented, the idea that humanity once lived in unity, sharing a single home before being scattered across the globe. Whether that home was a geological continent or a symbolic one, whether its destruction was literal or poetic, Mu stood as a reminder that the story of our origins may be far more intricate than we think. Somewhere between science and myth, between what can be measured and what can only be imagined, the outline of Mu still drifts in the mind's eye. And for now, that is where it will remain, at least until someone finds the proof that has eluded us for over a century. But proof or not, the next chapter in the story will push us even further into the realm of the impossible, to examine whether the people of Mu were entirely human at all. To follow the thread of Mu into its most mysterious territory, we have to step away from the stones and maps for a moment and enter a more speculative space, the question of who its people actually were. In Churchward's account, the Nikal of Mu were humans, but humans unlike any who came after them. They were said to be taller, stronger, and more harmonious in their way of life, governed by a single set of laws and united under one spiritual belief system. Their society, according to his translations, had no great internal wars, no fractured kingdoms, and no endless cycles of conquest and collapse. Instead, their energy was devoted to knowledge, astronomy, agriculture, navigation, and architecture, mastered to a degree that still puzzles even the most optimistic view of ancient human capability. But the deeper you read into these accounts, the more the line between myth and science fiction begins to blur. Embedded within the tablets, Churchward claimed, were hints that the Nikal's origins were not purely terrestrial. This is where the so-called ancient astronaut hypothesis enters, a theory suggesting that in humanity's deep past, beings from beyond Earth visited and shaped our development. For many, The phrase conjures images of sleek starships and glowing machinery, but in the context of Mu, it is far more subtle. These beings, if they existed, were woven into the life of the continent, not as distant overseers but as direct participants. Supporters of the idea point to parallel myths from cultures separated by thousands of miles and centuries of time. The Sumerians spoke of the Anunnaki, celestial beings who descended from the heavens to establish order and teach humanity the arts of civilization. The Mayan Popol Vuh tells of sky gods who fashioned mankind from nothing, breathing life into figures of clay and corn. The Hindu Vedas describe Vimanas, aerial chariots piloted by divine figures whose battles and journeys played out both in the skies and on the ground. To believers, these are not disconnected stories, but fragments of a single memory that a more advanced intelligence once walked among early humans. If Mu was their first point of contact, as some suspect, the Nikal may have been the product of hybridization, a mingling of human and otherworldly DNA. It is a controversial idea even in fringe research, not only because it challenges the boundaries of anthropology, but because it forces a reconsideration of what it means to be human at all. Could the precision of Mu's alleged architecture, the ease with which its people navigated vast oceans, and the unity of its culture all stem from an inheritance we no longer possess? Or, more provocatively, from a partnership we have long since forgotten? This line of thinking leads to unsettling implications. If such a relationship existed, was it voluntary, a shared venture between two species, or was it imposed? Ancient myths are filled with both benevolent and domineering gods, some bringing gifts, others demanding tribute or obedience. The question becomes even darker when we consider the possibility that Mu's sudden destruction was not an accident of geology, but an intentional act. Could it be that the continent was erased because of what it represented, a merging of worlds that others, human or otherwise, found unacceptable? Here, the legend takes on the flavor of a cautionary tale. Some versions suggest that the Nakal's knowledge became too great, their independence too absolute, prompting those who had once guided them to intervene in the most final way possible. Others propose that the hybrids themselves, if hybrids they were, could not sustain their population over time, their unique genetic balance unstable in the face of environmental change. In either scenario, the end of Mu becomes not just a disaster, but a form of deliberate erasure. Of course, mainstream historians dismiss all of this as imaginative overreach. There is no physical evidence of extraterrestrial visitation, no genetic markers in modern humans that point conclusively to non-Earth origins. Linguists argue that similarities between myths are the result of shared human psychology and the universal themes of creation, destruction, and divine intervention. And yet, the persistence of these parallels, from the South Pacific to the Middle East, from Central America to the Indian subcontinent, keeps the idea alive in the public imagination. Even without proof, it is difficult to shake the sense that such similarities demand an explanation. For those captivated by the mystery, Mu's story becomes a lens through which to view all of human history. The pyramids, the moai, the precision-cut stone walls of Cusco in Peru, the undeciphered symbols on Easter Island's Rongo-Rongo tablets, all become pieces of a larger puzzle. Could these be the work of cultures independently reaching their own heights? Or are they the echoes of a shared ancestor civilization, the last scattered fingerprints of a lost world? Churchward himself was clear about where he stood. In his books, he painted Mu as the first great center of human life, the place from which all other civilizations radiated like spokes from a wheel. Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, the pre-Columbian Americas all were, in his telling, the children of Mu, their core achievements rooted in a body of knowledge carried across oceans by survivors. If this was true, it would mean that the history we have written for ourselves is incomplete, a middle chapter without its beginning. And yet, without the original tablets to examine, without even a single authenticated artifact that can be traced directly to Mu, the story remains adrift between belief and skepticism. This tension is part of its endurance. If Mu had been definitively proven, it would have been absorbed into textbooks and treated as settled fact. If it had been conclusively disproven, it would have faded into the background noise of discarded ideas. Instead, it exists in a liminal space, compelling enough to inspire, elusive enough to resist closure. What is certain is that the legend touches something deep in the human imagination. We are drawn to the idea of a unified origin, a golden age in which our species lived in balance with itself and the world, before some great fall scattered us across the globe. Whether Mu was a real place or a symbolic one, it functions as a mirror, reflecting our hopes and fears about who we are and where we come from. Perhaps that is why, despite all the arguments against it, the story continues to find new audiences. Somewhere in the intersection of myth, memory, and the ocean's uncharted depths, Mu waits, not necessarily to be found in stone or sand, but to be explored in the way we think about our past. The next steps in this journey will take us beyond the romanticized vision of lost continents and into the harder questions. If Mu's people truly carried a body of knowledge unknown to us now, where did it go? And if even fragments of it survive, hidden in plain sight, could rediscovering it change the course of our future as dramatically as it once shaped our past? If the nation truly held knowledge beyond anything preserved in our modern records, the question becomes almost irresistible. Where did it all go? In the official timeline of history, breakthroughs in astronomy, engineering, and navigation appear in different civilizations at different times, each seemingly the product of local innovation. But the story of Mu suggests a different pattern, that these skills were once concentrated in a single place, refined over millennia, and then scattered in fragments when the motherland vanished. If that scattering happened, it would mean the legacies of Mu might still be with us, not in intact blueprints or perfectly preserved tools, but in echoes and adaptations woven into the fabric of later cultures. One of the most compelling arguments for this view comes from architecture. Across the globe, ancient structures show a level of precision and durability that modern builders sometimes struggle to match. The Great Pyramid of Giza aligns almost perfectly with the cardinal points of the compass, its base measurements so exact that they differ by mere fractions of an inch. In Peru, the walls of Sacsayhuaman fit massive stones together so tightly that even a thin blade cannot slide between them, despite no use of mortar. On Easter Island, the Moai stand as silent witnesses to an engineering feat that required not only skill but deep coordination within a society. To believers in Mu, these are not isolated achievements. They are regional variations on a shared ancestral skill set, carried by those who fled the sinking land. In Churchward's reconstruction, this knowledge was more than just technical. It was spiritual in a way that blurred the boundaries between religion and science. The Nakul, he wrote, did not separate the physical world from the metaphysical. To them, understanding the movements of the stars was not merely a matter of navigation or plantung seasons. It was part of understanding the nature of existence itself. Their temples doubled as observatories, their rituals as methods of encoding and transmitting knowledge. In such a culture, losing the homeland would have meant more than the loss of material wealth. It would have meant the disruption of the very system that kept their knowledge alive. And so, when the survivors reached new lands, their descendants preserved what they could. But without the full structure of Mu's society to sustain it, that knowledge began to fragment. Some pieces may have been hidden deliberately, perhaps to prevent misuse or to protect sacred traditions from being diluted. Others were transformed over generations into myths, stripped of their technical details but retaining their symbolic meaning. In this way, a practical method for moving massive stones might become, over centuries, a legend of statues that walked. A precise astronomical observation could become a story of gods descending from the sky. The essence of the information remained, but its original context was lost. This process is not unique to the legend of Mu. Anthropologists have observed similar patterns in other cultures when they undergo rapid disruption, whether from war, migration, or environmental collapse. Practical survival techniques become encoded in ceremonial songs. Memories of real disasters transform into cautionary tales told to children. If Mu existed, its legacy may be hiding in plain sight, buried not in the ground but in the living traditions of its supposed descendants. One example often cited by those exploring this idea is the Polynesian art of navigation. Long before European explorers ventured into the Pacific, Polynesian voyagers were sailing thousands of miles between islands without compasses or maps. They read the stars, the swell of the ocean, the flight patterns of birds, and the color of the water to find their way. These techniques were passed down orally, preserved in chants and stories. To the people who practiced them, they were simply part of life. To an outsider searching for traces of Mu, they might be the preserved fragment of a much older, much broader mastery of the seas. Another possible remnant lies in the recurring motif of a lost homeland across multiple cultures. The Greeks had Atlantis. The Maya had their tales of lands swallowed by the sea. Pacific Islanders told of Hawaii or other distant places from which their ancestors came. Skeptics argue that such stories arise naturally in seafaring cultures, where migration and disaster are common. But to those who see the world through the lens of Mu, these shared themes are like fingerprints, evidence of a shared trauma, remembered and reinterpreted in different languages and settings. Still, the absence of tangible, verifiable artifacts tied directly to Mu remains the great obstacle. Churchward never produced the original Nacl tablets for independent examination. The Niven tablets, while real, have never been conclusively linked to the Pacific or to any culture matching Churchward's description of Mu. And the supposed underwater structures that some divers have claimed to see in the Pacific remain controversial, often explained as natural rock formations. In the absence of hard proof, the case for Mu must rely on patterns, similarities of design, myth, and method across cultures separated by vast distances and centuries. For some, that is enough to keep the theory alive. Human history is full of examples where once dismissed ideas later found unexpected support. The city of Troy, long considered a mythical invention from Homer's epics, was eventually uncovered in the 19th century by Heinrich Schliemann. The existence of giant squids, once thought to be sailors' hallucinations, was confirmed with photographic evidence in the 21st century. Such examples offer a kind of cautious hope to those who believe in Mu. The possibility that what is dismissed as legend today might one day be recognized as fact. Yet there is also a cautionary side to this hope. For every myth later proven true, there are countless others that remain just stories, their origins tangled in the human tendency to imagine grander pasts and more dramatic catastrophes than history can support. Mu, for now, belongs to that vast category of unverified possibilities, not disproven, but not confirmed, suspended in the strange space where imagination, memory, and scattered data meet. And perhaps that is why the legend continues to resonate. It is a story about connection, that all of us, no matter our current borders or languages, might trace our origins to the same shore. It is a story about loss, that something magnificent and unifying could vanish almost without a trace. And it is a story about endurance, that even when a world is gone, pieces of it might survive in the way we build, the way we tell stories, and the way we look at the stars. As we move deeper into this exploration, the question will shift from whether Mu existed to what it would mean if it did. If its people truly carried knowledge that we have lost, could we recover it? And if we could, would we even understand how to use it? Or would we risk repeating the same mistakes that may have led to their destruction? If we are to imagine Mu not as a mere legend, but as a tangible place in Earth's distant past, then we have to imagine its destruction not only as an ending, but as a transformation. Civilizations do not vanish without leaving behind ripples. The world is full of such ripples, cultural anomalies, unexplained technologies, and stubborn myths. And to believers in Mu, they form a trail leading back to that lost motherland. Yet the further one follows that trail, the more it blurs into something stranger, a story that is less about archaeology and more about the forces that shape human memory. Churchward's account of Mu's final night reads almost like a piece of epic poetry, but in his telling it was drawn from the plain words of the knuckle tablets. The earth beneath the continent trembled violently. Volcanoes erupted in succession, throwing up plumes of ash that turned day into darkness. The seas swelled with unnatural speed, surging inland as if summoned. Great fissures split the land, swallowing cities whole. And then, in what he described as a single convulsion, the entire landmass dropped into the depths, disappearing beneath what he called the great abyss of fire. It was over before the survivors could even comprehend what had happened. In geological terms, this scenario is almost impossible. Land doesn't simply fall into the ocean like a collapsing stage set. Even massive earthquakes rarely cause more than localized subsidence. The slow grind of tectonic plates can raise mountains or open rift valleys, but it operates over millions of years. To mainstream science, Churchward's description sounds more like a symbolic condensation of multiple disasters, perhaps a combination of volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, and long-term sea level rise, remembered as one catastrophic night. But legends have a way of amplifying the impossible, and for those invested in the idea of Mu, this sudden destruction has a different significance. In their view, it is the ultimate explanation for why a civilization so advanced could leave so little behind. If Mu's knowledge, art, and architecture were centralized in its great cities, then their sudden obliteration would have erased the physical heart of its culture in an instant. The survivors, scattered across thousands of miles, would have carried fragments, but not the whole. In this light, the migration patterns of ancient peoples take on new meaning. Polynesian voyagers crossing open ocean, the earliest settlers of the Americas arriving by sea, the mysterious origins of certain South American coastal cultures, all could, in theory, be seen as the footprints of Mu's refugees. Some proponents even suggest that the sudden rise of advanced societies in otherwise isolated areas might be explained by the arrival of these survivors, bringing with them skills in agriculture, navigation, and construction that far outpaced the local norm. Yet migration is not proof, and here the debate always returns to the same impasse. Mainstream archaeologists point out that human beings are endlessly inventive and that similar solutions can arise independently in different places. Oceanic navigation, for example, is a skill that could be developed in multiple regions without a shared origin, especially for peoples living on archipelagos. But to the believers, the precision and scale of some ancient achievements suggest an inheritance, not an invention, a spark passed down from an older flame. And so the hunt for physical traces of Mu continues, often in the places least accessible to us. The ocean floor. Over the decades, divers and researchers have claimed to find unusual formations beneath the waves, terraces, walls, and shapes that appear too regular to be natural. The most famous of these is the Yonaguni Monument off the coast of Japan, a massive stepped formation that some insist is the remnant of a sunken city. While most geologists classify it as a natural structure shaped by currents and fractures, a few argue for human modification. If those few are correct, it could represent the edge of a forgotten settlement. Perhaps not Mu itself, but a fragment of the wider world it once touched. But here lies the frustration. The deeper one goes, the harder it becomes to separate fact from interpretation. Every stone terrace underwater could be a coincidence of geology. Every carving on a weathered slab could be the work of a much later hand. The ocean guards its secrets fiercely, and without the kind of incontrovertible artifact that could link such structures to a specific time and culture, they remain suggestive, but not definitive. Still, to dismiss the possibility outright is to underestimate the persistence of human memory. Around the world, oral traditions have preserved astonishingly accurate accounts of real geological events, volcanic eruptions, meteor impacts, and sea level changes passed down for hundreds or even thousands of years. Some Aboriginal stories in Australia, for example, describe coastal landscapes as they were before being flooded at the end of the last ice age, a detail confirmed by modern geological mapping. If such accuracy is possible, then perhaps the legends of Mu are not mere fantasy, but a heavily mythologized record of real events that took place in the deep past. This is the paradox at the heart of the Mu debate. The story may be too extraordinary to fit within the neat boundaries of current science, yet too persistent to be ignored entirely. Its survival suggests that it speaks to something fundamental in us, a longing for unity, for a time when the world was less divided, and for the possibility that we have lost more than we realize. Whether Mu was a continent in the Pacific, a network of islands, or simply a symbolic homeland invented to explain migration and disaster, it endures because it offers a vision of connection. And perhaps that is why the legend has shown such resilience in the face of skepticism. Each generation finds new ways to interpret it, adapting the details to fit new understandings of the world. In the early 20th century, Mu was presented as a literal lost continent, a kind of Pacific Atlantis. In more recent decades, it has been reimagined as a metaphor for a prehistoric global civilization, or even as an allegory for the fragility of complex societies. In the realm of speculative history and alternative archaeology, Mu remains one of the most potent symbols, a reminder that the line between what is possible and what is accepted is not always the same. From here, the story will take us into the heart of the most disputed territory, the supposed connections between Mu and the earliest civilizations we can document with certainty. Were the builders of the first pyramids, the planners of ancient cities, and the astronomers who charted the heavens working from their own genius alone, or were they the distant heirs of a knowledge system forged in a place now hidden beneath the Pacific? The answer, if there is one, may change not just how we view Mu, but how we understand the entire arc of human history. When you trace the oldest human civilizations back through time, the trail eventually reaches a point where written history dissolves into archaeology, and archaeology dissolves into speculation. In that hazy space, the legend of Mu finds its most fertile ground. For Churchward, the great cultures we know, Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, Mesoamerica, were not isolated sparks, but branches from the same ancient root. If his reading of the Nacre tablets was correct, the survivors of Mu carried their knowledge to new lands, sowing the seeds of civilizations that would rise thousands of years later. And while this sweeping theory has been criticized as overly romantic and lacking hard evidence, there is no denying that certain parallels between these early cultures continue to invite curiosity. Consider the pyramids. In Egypt, the Great Pyramid at Giza is aligned so precisely to the cardinal directions that its error margin is less than 1/20th of a degree, a feat that would challenge even modern engineers. Thousands of miles away in Mexico, the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan rises with similar geometric precision, and its layout mirrors astronomical alignments that were just as important to the people who built it. In China's Shaanxi province, ancient pyramidal mounds follow the same basic principles, though they are built of earth rather than stone. Mainstream archaeology explains these similarities as convergent evolution. Cultures faced with similar architectural challenges and ceremonial needs arrive at similar solutions. But for believers in Mu, the shared geometry is more than coincidence. It is a signature. The same argument extends to megalithic construction. From the Cyclopean stone walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru to the Trilithon at Baalbek in Lebanon, there are ancient structures whose blocks are so large and precisely cut that their construction remains a topic of debate. Orthodox explanations cite ingenious but labor-intensive methods using ramps, levers, and coordinated human effort. Alternative theories suggest these feats required a mastery of physics or tools that have not survived into the present. To proponents of Mu, such construction is exactly what you would expect from cultures preserving fragments of a much older engineering tradition. Language, too, has been drawn into the discussion. Churchward claimed that elements of the Naga Maya script he learned in India could be found in the symbols carved on the Niven tablets from Mexico. While most linguists reject this as unsubstantiated, the idea has inspired some to search for deeper connections between the world's language families. If a proto-language had once existed, the spoken and written tongue of Mu, its echoes might still be hidden in the structure of modern languages, just as Indo-European roots link English to Hindi or Greek. Yet here, too, the evidence is slippery, complicated by the way languages evolve, borrow, and lose words over time. Even the mythic and spiritual traditions of early cultures have been compared for signs of a common origin. Flood myths are among the most widespread stories on Earth. The Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh describes a deluge sent by the gods, a tale mirrored in the Hebrew Bible's account of Noah, in Hindu stories of Manu, and in Polynesian legends of great waves swallowing the land. Skeptics argue that floods are such a common and devastating natural event that it's inevitable they would be enshrined in myth worldwide. But for those looking through the lens of Mu, these are all distant memories of the same cataclysm. The night the great motherland was lost to the sea. To understand why this idea persists despite the lack of definitive proof, you have to look at what it offers. A narrative that connects humanity across geography and time, one that frames our diversity as the branches of a single ancient family tree. It is a powerful antidote to the more fragmented view of history, where civilizations rise and fall in isolation, learning little from one another until relatively late in the human story. Mu, if real, would mean that our shared heritage runs deeper than we think, and that even cultures separated by oceans may have begun side by side. But this vision comes with its own challenges. If the survivors of Mu truly spread across the globe, why is there no more direct archaeological evidence? No tools, inscriptions, or artifacts that can be securely dated to a time before Egypt or Sumer. Some believers argue that the perishable materials used in certain types of Mu construction could explain this absence. If much of their architecture was built in wood or other organic materials, it would have vanished long ago, leaving only stone monuments in the most durable forms. Others suggest that the survivors deliberately concealed their origins, either to protect their knowledge from misuse or because their identity became a burden in the eyes of the societies they joined. There is also the possibility that Mu's influence, if it existed, was less about physical migration and more about cultural diffusion through long-distance seafaring. Maritime archaeologists have uncovered evidence that humans were capable of significant ocean voyages far earlier than previously believed. Ancient Lapita culture, for example, spread across thousands of miles of the Pacific more than 3,000 years ago, using advanced navigation skills passed down orally. If such capabilities existed in prehistory, then knowledge, including architectural ideas, myths, and even religious practices, could have traveled without large-scale population movements. The idea of Mu's influence reaches even further when viewed through the lens of technology. In Churchward's writings, he hinted at an advanced science that blended seamlessly with spirituality, allowing the knackle to harness forces unknown to us today. This is one of the controversial aspects of his account, often dismissed as pure fantasy. Yet it resonates with the broader pattern of legends about lost technologies, the lightning weapons of Zeus, the flying machines of the Vedas, the fire from the sky in Native American stories. Could these be poetic descriptions of real tools and devices filtered through the language of myth? Or are they simply metaphors for natural forces misunderstood by ancient peoples? In the absence of proof, the debate often becomes less about evidence and more about worldview. To accept the possibility of Mu is to accept that human history might be far older and more interconnected than current models allow. It is to allow for the idea that entire civilizations could rise, thrive, and vanish without leaving the kind of traces we consider definitive. To reject Mu is to maintain the framework that history, while full of mysteries, is essentially knowable through the tools of archaeology, geology, and linguistics as they stand today. What makes the legend enduring is that it does not require absolute belief to capture the imagination. Even for those who doubt its literal truth, Mu works as a symbol of the fragility of human achievement, of the vastness of the past, and of the possibility that there are still chapters of our story waiting to be rediscovered. In this way, the lost continent becomes not just a place but a mirror reflecting our curiosity back at us. And it is in that mirror that we might glimpse something unexpected, the urge to keep searching, even when we know the answers may never come. If Mu's shadow stretches across the ancient world, then perhaps the most revealing way to trace it is not by looking for what is present but for what is missing. Human history, as preserved in the archaeological record, is a patchwork of sudden leaps. Farming appears in the Fertile Crescent around 10,000 years ago, and within a few millennia cities rise in Mesopotamia with monumental architecture, codified laws, and complex trade systems. Thousands of miles away, the Indus Valley culture develops advanced urban planning, complete with grid layouts and sophisticated drainage systems. Across the ocean, the Olmec civilization emerges with colossal stone heads and intricate ceremonial centers. Conventional history explains these as independent breakthroughs, the natural outcome of human innovation responding to local needs. But the legend of Mu whispers another explanation, that these were not spontaneous sparks but embers carried from the same ancient fire. If that is the case, then each of these early civilizations may hold clues to a common ancestor. In Churchward's vision, the survivors of Mu did not simply wander aimlessly into the world. They settled with purpose, choosing locations where their skills could flourish. They might have introduced agriculture to societies still reliant on hunting and gathering, taught maritime navigation to coastal peoples, or demonstrated stoneworking techniques to communities unfamiliar with large-scale construction. Over time, these gifts would be absorbed and adapted until the memory of their origin faded, replaced by local myths that only dimly reflected the reality. One of the most compelling examples of this process lies in the similarities between distant mythologies. Creation stories often begin with a watery void, a shapeless chaos from which the first land emerges. In Polynesian tradition, the god Tangaroa rules over the seas, and creation begins when land rises from the depths. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Enuma Elish tells of the separation of land from the primordial waters. Even in the Bible's Genesis, the Spirit of God moves over the waters before shaping the world. To those looking for the fingerprints of Mu, these stories are not mere coincidence but a distorted recollection of a time when the ocean itself claimed a homeland. Language, too, offers tantalizing fragments. Churchward believed that the Naga Maya script contained elements that predated any known writing system, and that traces of it could be found from Central America to Southeast Asia. Most linguists reject such claims, pointing out that similarities in symbols are often superficial and can arise independently. Yet even skeptics admit that ancient scripts can influence each other across surprising distances, especially when carried by traders, migrants, or mariners. If Mu existed and its people were skilled seafarers, their language could have left faint imprints in places far beyond the Pacific. Maritime ability is one of the cornerstones of the Mu hypothesis. The Pacific, dotted with islands scattered across thousands of miles, was never a barrier to the Polynesians, whose double-hulled canoes could travel enormous distances using only the stars, wave patterns, and the behavior of birds and fish as guides. This skill is widely believed to have developed over centuries of exploration. But in the story of Mu, it was an inheritance, the distilled knowledge of a civilization that had long mastered the art of crossing open ocean. Such expertise could explain how survivors might have reached both the shores of the Americas and the archipelagos of the Indian Ocean. If this sounds like speculation, it is worth remembering that many once believed prehistoric peoples could not have crossed oceans at all. That assumption has been overturned by finds like the Lapita pottery trail in the Pacific and genetic evidence linking distant island populations. In that light, The idea that survivors of a sunken homeland could reach far-flung destinations becomes less implausible, though still without direct proof. What remains most elusive is the question of why such a civilization, if it existed, left no universally recognized monuments or artifacts. Part of the answer may lie in how we define evidence. Archaeology relies heavily on context, the ability to date objects and link them to specific cultures. If Mu's survivors integrated into other societies rather than rebuilding their own in full, their tools, symbols, and even building styles would become absorbed into the local culture. Over generations, these elements would blend so completely that separating them from native traditions would be nearly impossible. This process of cultural blending happens even in well-documented history. When the Romans absorbed Greek art and architecture, the Greek origins remained clear only to scholars, while the general public came to see these styles as Roman. In the same way, Mu's legacy could be hiding in plain sight, mislabeled as the independent invention of the societies that adopted it. To recognize it would require not just finding shared traits, but proving that they share a single, earlier source, a task complicated by time, erosion, and the loss of the nacre tablets that Churchward claimed to have read. Skeptics often point to this absence as the fatal flaw in the Mu hypothesis. Without verifiable artifacts, the theory cannot cross the threshold from legend to accepted history. But believers counter that history is full of rediscoveries once thought impossible. The ruins of Troy were long dismissed as a myth until the 19th century. The city of Machu Picchu was unknown to the outside world until 1911. Even now, entire complexes like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey are rewriting what we thought we knew about the timeline of human civilization. Perhaps Mu's turn simply has not come yet. Beyond the question of proof lies a deeper reason for Mu's enduring appeal. It is not just a story about a lost place, but about unity. In an age when our histories are often told in fragments, divided by nation, language, and culture, Mu offers a vision of a common beginning. Whether real or symbolic, it suggests that humanity's diversity might spring from a single source and that we are more connected than we realize. It is this idea, as much as the mystery of sunken continents, that keeps people searching. But as the search continues, so does the debate over what form Mu might have taken if it existed. Was it truly a vast landmass larger than South America, as Churchward claimed? Or was it a chain of islands vulnerable to the combined forces of volcanic eruption, earthquake, and rising seas? Could it have been a cultural, rather than a geographic center? A federation of coastal societies whose unity gave rise to the illusion of a single continent in later memory? The answers to these questions, if they exist, are locked somewhere between geology, archaeology, and the enduring human habit of turning memory into myth. The next step in unraveling the legend will take us into the heart of its most contentious claim. That Mu was not just the cradle of humanity as we know it, but the stage on which the first meeting between human beings and something or someone from beyond our world took place. If the legend of Mu is to be believed, then its people, the Nikkel, were not simply human in the way we think of humanity today. They were something more, something shaped by influences that might not have been entirely of this earth. This is where the story steps beyond archaeology and into the realm of what some call the ancient astronaut hypothesis. The idea that thousands of years ago, beings from beyond our planet visited Earth, interacted with its earliest civilizations, and left a lasting imprint on our development. In the context of Mu, the theory becomes even bolder. It suggests that the continent was not only a cradle of human advancement, but also the point of contact between humanity and an otherworldly intelligence. Churchward himself never described the Nikkel as alien. He insisted they were human, though of a superior kind, united, harmonious, and deeply knowledgeable in ways that outstripped anything in the modern world. But the details he recorded from the tablets, their mastery of navigation, architecture, and what he called spiritual forces, left the door open for others to speculate about an origin beyond simple human evolution. If the Nikkel were the result of a meeting between early Homo sapiens and visitors from elsewhere, it could explain why their abilities seemed to leap ahead of the timeline accepted by mainstream historians. Around the world, ancient stories echo this theme. The Sumerians wrote of the Anunnaki, those who came from the heavens, who bestowed upon humans the knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and governance. In the Maya Popol Vuh, gods descended from the sky to shape humanity from clay and maize. In the Hindu Vedas, flying craft called vimanas carried divine beings who engaged in battles and journeys across the skies. These are often interpreted as allegories or religious visions, but for those who connect them to Mu, they are fragments of a shared, forgotten history, one in which the Nikkel were both heirs to and partners with these skyborn teachers. Such a possibility raises uncomfortable questions. If Mu was the center of this relationship, why did it end so abruptly? Was the cataclysm that sank the continent a natural disaster? Or could it have been something more deliberate, an attempt to erase the results of a failed or dangerous experiment? Some versions of the legend frame Mu's destruction as punishment, a response to hubris or to the misuse of advanced knowledge. Others see it as collateral damage in a conflict that had nothing to do with humans at all, a war between powers far beyond our understanding in which Earth was only a battlefield. Even for those who dismiss extraterrestrial involvement, the hybrid theory offers an intriguing metaphor. The Nikkel in this reading represent a synthesis of qualities, the adaptability and resourcefulness of early humans combined with an infusion of ideas or techniques from an external source, whether that source was another culture, a lost branch of humanity, or something more exotic. Such combinations can produce bursts of innovation, but they can also create instability. If the society of Mu depended on the balance between these elements, any disruption, environmental, social, or otherwise, could have been catastrophic. And yet, if there was a hybrid origin, traces of it might still be visible today. Not in our DNA in a way that science has identified, but in the persistence of certain skills and motifs. The extraordinary accuracy of ancient astronomical observations, the recurrence of megalithic architecture, and the symbolic language of spirals, solar disks, and stepped forms could be seen as cultural genes, inherited traits passed down through countless generations, long after their original context was forgotten. Mainstream science, of course, resists such interpretations. There is no confirmed archaeological layer containing artifacts that could be tied to advanced technology older than the earliest known civilizations. Linguistic comparisons between unrelated language families are fraught with false matches and coincidences, and without physical evidence, the leap from myth to history is one most scholars are unwilling to make. But this skepticism has not diminished public fascination with the idea. If anything, it has intensified it, because the absence of proof allows the imagination to roam freely over the possibilities. One of the reasons the Mu narrative blends so easily with ancient astronaut theory is its setting. The Pacific Ocean is vast, remote, and still, in many places, poorly explored. It is not difficult to imagine that somewhere among its depths lies a ridge, a plateau, or a sunken caldera hiding structures we have yet to discover. Add to this the region's active geology, the ring of fire that arcs around the Pacific, producing earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunamis, and you have the perfect backdrop for a civilization to rise and vanish in spectacular fashion. Such an environment could also create the kind of dramatic natural phenomena that, to ancient observers, might have looked like the work of gods or otherworldly forces. It is in this crucible of speculation that Mu continues to evolve as a legend. For some, it is the missing link between humanity's distant past and a future in which we might once again reach beyond our planet. For others, it is a cautionary tale about the fragility of even the most advanced societies when confronted with forces they cannot control. And for those who lean toward the hybrid theory, it is both a story of potential and loss, of a moment when the human story might have taken a very different path. If there is truth in any of it, then perhaps the key to finding it lies not only in the depths of the Pacific, but in the stories, symbols, and skills we still carry today. Just as geneticists can trace a person's ancestry through fragments of DNA, cultural historians might one day be able to trace the lineage of an idea or a technology back to its point of origin. Whether that point turns out to be Mu or something else entirely, the process of searching for it will force us to confront the deepest questions about where we come from and where we might be headed. The next stage of this journey will take us further into the contested territory where geology, archaeology, and human imagination collide. We will examine the natural explanations for Mu's disappearance and the possibility that the legend is not the memory of a single event, but the merging of many real catastrophes into one enduring story. In doing so, we may find that the truth, while less fantastical than alien contact, is no less remarkable in what it reveals about the way humans remember and reinterpret their past. The question of how Mu met its end is the point where the legend collides most directly with the disciplines of geology and oceanography. According to Churchward, the destruction was sudden and absolute. A single night of fire, ash, and surging seas in which the entire landmass was swallowed by the Pacific. To modern geologists, this version of events is not simply unlikely. It is impossible. Continents are made of thick, buoyant crust that does not simply sink into the ocean. Even when parts of the Earth's surface collapse, as during the formation of volcanic calderas, the effect is localized. For an area the size of Mu to vanish overnight, the laws of plate tectonics, the very processes that shape the continents, would have to work in ways they do not. Yet the appeal of Churchward's cataclysmic vision is undeniable. It offers a clean, dramatic break, the kind of event that could wipe away almost all traces of a civilization and leave survivors scattered with only fragments of their past. This sense of totality is one reason the Mu legend has endured. It explains the absence of physical evidence by making that absence the very point. But there is another possibility, one that sits more comfortably within the known forces of the natural world. Many researchers who take an interest in ancient catastrophes suggest that the story of Mu could be a composite memory, the merging of multiple real disasters into a single myth. The Pacific is home to some of the most violent geological activity on Earth. Entire islands have been created and destroyed by volcanic eruptions. Earthquakes along subduction zones, where one tectonic plate is forced beneath another, can trigger massive tsunamis capable of erasing coastal settlements in hours. In 1883, the eruption of Krakatoa in Indonesia generated waves more than 100 feet high and was heard nearly 3,000 miles away. To the people who experienced it, such an event might well have felt like the end of the world. It is not difficult to imagine how repeated exposure to disasters of this scale over generations could form the backbone of a legend like Mu's fall. Oral traditions are remarkably good at preserving the emotional truth of an event even as the details shift over time. A series of smaller island sinkings, coastal inundations, and volcanic eruptions could, in the telling, become the destruction of an entire continent. And if these events occurred during a period of global sea level rise, such as the one that ended the last ice age around 12,000 years ago, the combination of flooding and seismic upheaval could give rise to a story that is both cataclysmic and geographically expansive. This timing is significant because it overlaps not only with the geological record of rising seas, but also with other flood legends from around the world. In the Indonesian archipelago, myths tell of lands that were once dry, now buried beneath the ocean. Aboriginal Australians speak of coastal territories that existed before the sea came in. In the Americas, stories among the Coast Salish people recall a time when the ocean rose to cover all but the highest peaks. To a storyteller piecing together fragments from different communities, these could easily merge into the memory of a single lost homeland, one so vast it must have been a continent. Some scholars point to the Sundaland theory as a possible origin for the Mu legend. Sundaland refers to the now submerged continental shelf that connected much of Southeast Asia during the Ice Age. When the glaciers melted, vast areas of low-lying land were inundated, creating the modern islands of Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. This event, real and geologically documented, could have been remembered by ancient mariners who later sailed into the Pacific, carrying with them stories of a great land drowned by the sea. Over centuries, those stories might have been adapted, shifted eastward in imagination or memory, and merged with other tales to create the Mu narrative. Another candidate for the seed of the legend lies in the Pacific itself. The islands of Micronesia and Polynesia are dotted with megalithic structures whose origins are not fully understood. On the island of Pohnpei, the ruined city of Nan Madol sprawls across a series of artificial islets, its basalt walls rising from tidal canals. Built centuries ago, its construction still baffles engineers, particularly given the lack of metal tools among its builders. While mainstream archaeology attributes Nan Madol to local rulers, some see it as a remnant of an older tradition, perhaps one inherited from distant ancestors whose homeland lay farther east or west. This interplay between memory, migration, and material remains may be the key to understanding why Mu persists as more than just a curiosity. The human brain is wired to look for patterns, to connect scattered dots into a coherent picture. When we see similar architecture, similar myths, and similar symbols in places far apart, we naturally wonder if they are related. The orthodox answer is that these similarities arise from parallel development, that people given the same challenges often find the same solutions. The Mu hypothesis offers an alternative, that the parallels are the result of a shared origin, now hidden beneath the waves. But to bridge the gap between legend and accepted history, that shared origin would need to be proven with the kind of evidence science demands: datable artifacts, clear stratigraphic layers, and inscriptions that can be definitively linked to both the Pacific and to known cultures elsewhere. Without that, the Mu story remains in what some researchers call the gray zone, too elaborate to dismiss entirely, too unverified to embrace as fact. Still, it is worth remembering that many discoveries began in the gray zone. The idea that continents could move was dismissed as fantasy until the mid-20th century, when plate tectonics became the cornerstone of geology. The existence of a massive meteor impact ending the age of dinosaurs was once considered fringe. Now the Chicxulub crater in Mexico is a textbook example of catastrophic change. In that light, keeping an open mind about Mu does not necessarily mean believing every detail, but recognizing that the past still holds surprises we have yet to uncover. The enduring mystery is not just whether Mu existed, but why the idea of it resonates so strongly. Perhaps it is because it offers an origin story that unites rather than divides, suggesting that we all descend from a single place and a single people. Or perhaps it is because it speaks to a deeper truth about human civilization, that complexity is fragile, and that no matter how advanced we become, we are never immune to the forces of the earth. In either case, the search for Mu is as much about understanding ourselves as it is about finding a lost continent. From here, the story will take us into the cultural legacy that Mu, if real, might have left behind. The customs, technologies, and beliefs that could still be shaping the world today, hidden in plain sight among the traditions of far-flung peoples. If Mu did exist, and if its people scattered across the world in the wake of its destruction, then its legacy might not lie in the stones of ruined cities, but in the living traditions of its descendants. These are the kinds of clues that rarely make it into textbooks, skills, customs, and beliefs passed down through generations until their origins blur into the mist of time. Yet for those who look closely, certain patterns stand out, suggesting that fragments of Mu's knowledge may still shape the world in ways we hardly recognize. One of the most striking examples lies in the art of navigation. Long before magnetic compasses and GPS, the peoples of the Pacific were capable of sailing thousands of miles of open ocean with astonishing accuracy. Polynesian wayfinders read the night sky as if it were a map, memorizing the rising and setting points of key stars. They watched the shape and rhythm of waves, the drift of clouds, and even the flight patterns of seabirds to determine their position and heading. This was not guesswork. It was a disciplined body of knowledge learned over years of apprenticeship and practice. To mainstream historians, this represents a homegrown achievement of Polynesian culture. But to those searching for Mu's fingerprints, it is an inheritance, a distilled form of maritime mastery that could have been perfected on the long coasts of a vanished homeland. Agricultural techniques may hold another piece of the puzzle. In some Pacific islands, ancient irrigation systems still function, channeling water from mountain streams to terraced fields in ways that prevent erosion and maximize yields. The engineering behind these systems is deceptively simple, yet highly effective, allowing communities to thrive in environments where food production might otherwise be limited. Similar methods are found in parts of Southeast Asia and the Andes, thousands of miles apart. To skeptics, this is evidence of parallel development, different societies solving the same problem in similar ways. But to believers, it hints at a common origin, a set of techniques carried across oceans and adapted to local conditions. Religious and cosmological beliefs also offer tantalizing parallels. In many Pacific Island traditions, the ocean is not merely a physical space but a living presence, a realm inhabited by powerful beings and ancestral spirits. Creation myths often involve the emergence of land from the sea, sometimes through the actions of a divine craftsman, sometimes through the rising of a submerged world. These themes echo in distant cultures, in ancient Mesopotamia's stories of the god Marduk shaping land from the body of a sea monster, or in Norse myth, where the world is formed from the remains of a slain giant. If these are not direct connections, They may still reflect a shared human memory of the ocean's power to create and destroy, a memory sharpened by experiences like the loss of Mu. Even in architecture, certain echoes seem to carry. Across the Pacific and into the Americas, we find stepped platforms, aligned ceremonial spaces, and megalithic structures that appear to serve both practical and spiritual purposes. The Ahu platforms of Easter Island, on which the Moai stand, share a conceptual similarity with the raised ceremonial platforms of Polynesia and the terraced pyramids of Central America. While each culture's version is distinct, the underlying idea, to elevate sacred spaces above the surrounding land, is the same. It is a simple concept, but in the Mu narrative, it could be one of the many cultural genes inherited from a shared source. Some of the most intriguing parallels, however, are found in symbols. Spiral motifs, for instance, appear in rock art from New Zealand to California, from Ireland to Micronesia. The spiral is often interpreted as a representation of the sun, of cycles, or of a path inward toward a spiritual center. In Mu theory, it is a remnant of a language that once spanned the globe. Similarly, the recurring use of the sun disk, a central circle often surrounded by rays or other markings, in both Pacific and Old World art has been taken as evidence of a shared cosmology. Critics warn that such symbols are so universal in human culture that their presence proves little, yet their repetition across vast distances continues to intrigue those looking for hidden connections. The blending of legend and skill is another hallmark of what could be Mu's legacy. In many island cultures, navigation is taught not as a set of abstract rules, but as part of a sacred tradition, often accompanied by chants, rituals, or taboos. The same is true in farming, fishing, and building. Practical tasks are woven into a web of belief and story. This fusion of the material and the spiritual mirrors Churchward's description of the Nakul, who, according to the tablets, saw no division between the two. Knowledge was not just a tool, it was a sacred trust. Such integration might explain why the core of Mu's supposed knowledge survived while its details faded. Practical methods, how to grow food, how to find one's way, how to build, could be preserved in daily life, even as the larger framework of their origin was forgotten. Over generations, the rituals might remain even if their original purpose was lost, much like a folk song whose melody survives long after its words have changed. This process could hide Mu's influence in plain sight, embedded in traditions that seem entirely local. Yet there is a danger in stretching these parallels too far. Cultures influence each other constantly, especially through trade and migration. A shared symbol or technique might be the result of contact in the relatively recent past rather than a trace of a civilization thousands of years gone. The task, then, is to separate what could plausibly be ancient inheritance from what is more likely the product of later exchanges. This is where the absence of datable, unequivocal artifacts tied to Mu becomes a major obstacle. Without such anchors, the connections remain suggestive rather than conclusive. Still, the persistence of these echoes keeps the search alive. For some, it is not about proving every detail of Churchward's account, but about exploring the possibility that our world is more deeply interconnected than we imagine. Whether Mu was a literal continent or a symbolic name for a network of ancient cultures, its story encourages us to look at history not as a series of isolated rises and falls, but as a tapestry woven from threads that cross oceans and millennia. From here, the investigation turns back towards the Pacific itself, to the possibility that physical remnants of Mu, not just cultural echoes, may still lie hidden beneath its waves. And if even a fragment of such evidence were to surface, it could change the debate forever. To truly test the legend of Mu, we must leave the realm of oral tradition and cultural echoes and return to the physical world, to the places where stone meets seawater, and where the ocean may yet be keeping its secrets. For all the doubts surrounding Churchward's account, the idea that a once thriving civilization might lie beneath the Pacific is too compelling to ignore entirely. After all, the seafloor is the least explored part of our planet. We have mapped the surfaces of the Moon and Mars in greater detail than the ocean's depths. In that unexplored darkness, it is possible that ruins, or at least geological formations suggestive of human modification, still wait to be found. Over the decades, scattered claims have emerged of just such formations. Divers and researchers have reported underwater structures, terraces, walls, even what appear to be roadways, lying far below the reach of ordinary tides. The most famous of these is the Yonaguni Monument, off the coast of Japan's Ryukyu Islands. Discovered in 1986, Yonaguni is a massive step structure with flat terraces, sharp angles, and features that look uncannily like staircases and platforms. Some divers insist that these shapes are too regular to be the work of nature alone, pointing to what appear to be carvings and pillar-like formations. Mainstream geologists, however, counter that the monument's sandstone is prone to fracturing along straight lines, producing geometric shapes without human involvement. The debate over Yonaguni mirrors the debate over Mu itself. Without definitive artifacts or inscriptions, it is impossible to say whether the site is natural, artificial, or a blend of the two. Other underwater finds have fueled speculation. In the waters off Nanmadol in Micronesia, the ruins of a city built on a network of artificial islets extend into submerged areas, suggesting that parts of the site may have been lost to rising seas. Nanmadol's above-water ruins are already a marvel. Basalt columns stacked in massive walls, forming a complex of ceremonial and residential spaces unlike anything else in the Pacific. Archaeologists date the site to between the 12th and 17th centuries, but its unusual construction and location have led some to wonder whether it sits atop the remains of something much older. In the Mu narrative, places like Nanmadol are seen not as isolated creations, but as outposts, surviving fragments of a wider architectural tradition that once spanned the Pacific. There are also less famous but equally intriguing anomalies. Off the coast of Easter Island, sonar surveys have revealed unusual shapes on the seafloor that some divers describe as block-like formations. Near the Hawaiian Islands, certain submerged ridges bear an uncanny resemblance to ancient causeways, and scattered across the Pacific are stories from fishermen, divers, and coastal residents of stone pavements glimpsed beneath clear water on calm days. While most of these reports have never been studied in detail, they persist, quietly adding weight to the idea that something lies beneath the waves. The challenge, of course, is proving that such structures, if they exist, are truly ancient and human-made. The ocean is an unforgiving environment for archaeology. Saltwater erodes surfaces, marine life colonizes every crevice, and sediment buries objects over time. Even if a stone wall or platform survives intact, its context, the surrounding evidence that could date it and connect it to a known culture, may be lost. Without that context, the risk of misinterpretation is high. Natural rock formations can mimic human construction with startling accuracy, and without careful analysis, It is easy to see intention where none exists. Yet it is equally true that some of history's most important discoveries began as anomalies dismissed by experts. The ruins of Heracleion, an ancient Egyptian city, were long thought to be a legend until they were rediscovered underwater in 2000, remarkably preserved after more than 1,000 years beneath the Mediterranean. The city of Pavlopetri, off the coast of Greece, was identified in 1967 as one of the oldest submerged towns in the world, dating back over 5,000 years. These examples prove that human settlements can and do sink beneath the sea, and that they can remain hidden until technology or chance brings them to light. Advances in underwater mapping and exploration have begun to open new possibilities. High-resolution sonar, autonomous submersibles, and remote-operated vehicles can scan the seafloor in detail unimaginable a few decades ago. While most of these efforts focus on marine biology or resource exploration, some researchers hope they may also reveal signs of ancient structures. The problem is one of scale. The Pacific Ocean covers more than 60 million square miles, much of it thousands of feet deep. Searching for the ruins of Mu is like looking for a needle in a haystack, if the haystack were scattered across a continent-sized mountain range underwater. Still, there are regions that make tempting targets. The shallow waters of island shelves, where sea levels would have been lower during the Ice Age, are prime candidates. Areas around Micronesia, Melanesia, and Polynesia could once have been larger, connected landmasses that now lie submerged. Volcanic island chains, too, might hide clues. While volcanic activity can destroy settlements, it can also preserve them under layers of ash, much as Pompeii was preserved in Italy. The pursuit of such evidence is often as much about motivation as about method. For believers in Mu, even a small discovery, a worked stone where none should be, a submerged alignment that matches celestial patterns, could be a breakthrough. For skeptics, the bar is far higher. Without clear, datable artifacts linked to a culture otherwise unknown, the find remains an oddity, not a revolution. This divide ensures that even if suggestive evidence is found, it will likely fuel debate rather than settle it. And yet perhaps that is part of Mu's enduring power. Its physical absence forces us to work in two realms at once. The realm of tangible science, where sonar and carbon dating rule, and the realm of imagination, where patterns and stories connect across oceans. It is in this intersection that the legend has thrived for more than a century, adapting to new discoveries without ever being fully disproven. The search for Mu beneath the Pacific is, in many ways, a search for the limits of our knowledge. It asks how much of the past can truly be lost and how much can be reconstructed from fragments. It challenges the idea that the great story of human civilization is already known, suggesting instead that entire chapters may still be missing. Whether Mu is one of those chapters, or simply a tale we tell to fill the gaps, is a question that remains unanswered, and perhaps unanswerable for now. In the next stage of our journey, we will step back from the ocean floor and into the realm of competing interpretations. We will explore how scientists, historians, and independent researchers have each tried to explain the Mu legend, and why, despite their differences, none have been able to erase it completely from the map of human imagination. The legend of Mu has always been a crossroads where very different kinds of minds meet. On one side stand scientists and historians, armed with the tools of their disciplines, geology, archaeology, linguistics, and a demand for evidence that can be tested, dated, and verified. On the other side stand independent researchers, explorers, and storytellers, drawn by patterns, coincidences, and the lure of a mystery too big to let go. Between them lies a tension that has kept the idea alive for more than a century because neither side has been able to fully silence the other. For geologists, the strongest argument against Mu is the structure of the Earth itself. The theory of plate tectonics, now fundamental to modern geology, explains the movement of continents over millions of years. Continents are made of lighter, less dense rock that floats on heavier mantle beneath. Oceanic crust, by contrast, is denser and lies lower, forming the ocean floors. A landmass the size of Mu could not have simply sunk into the Pacific in the last 12,000 years without leaving unmistakable scars. Raised seafloor, displaced crust, and seismic traces that would still be visible. The Pacific Basin, extensively mapped by sonar and satellites, shows no such evidence of a missing continent. Archaeologists echo this skepticism, pointing to the lack of verifiable artifacts. Every known ancient civilization, from Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley, has left behind layers of material culture, pottery, tools, inscriptions, and waste deposits that allow researchers to date and reconstruct their histories. No such layer exists for Mu. The Nacre tablets Churchward claimed to have translated were never examined by anyone else. Without them, his entire narrative rests on unverified testimony, an unstable foundation in the eyes of academic research. Linguists, too, remain unconvinced. Languages evolve in traceable ways, and while they can share similarities across great distances, these links can usually be explained by migration or contact between neighboring peoples. Churchward's assertion that elements of the Naga Maya script appear in Central American writing is, to them, an example of false cognates, symbols or words that look alike by coincidence but have no real historical connection. Yet for all this, skeptics have never been able to erase Mu completely. Part of the reason lies in the nature of the claim. It is not specific enough to be disproven outright. If Mu were said to have existed in one exact location with precise boundaries, it could be definitively mapped, and if absent, dismissed. But Mu is described in broad strokes, its location covering a swath of Pacific that includes countless islands, seamounts, and submerged ridges. This vagueness allows the legend to shift and adapt, finding new footholds whenever a mysterious discovery emerges. Independent researchers, for their part, thrive in this uncertainty. They point to patterns in architecture, myth, and art that seem too consistent to be chance. They highlight anomalies in archaeology, unexplained megaliths, out-of-place artifacts, and traditions that appear suddenly without clear local precursors. In their view, the mainstream insistence on strict proof overlooks the cumulative weight of circumstantial evidence. A single similarity between two distant cultures may be coincidence, but dozens, they argue, begin to suggest a shared origin. Some even frame the scientific resistance to Mu as a kind of institutional inertia. History is written not only by what is discovered, but by what is accepted, and challenging the established timeline of human civilization requires more than just data. It requires a willingness to rethink deeply held assumptions. The idea that complex societies could have existed before the conventional starting points of history threatens to blur the clean lines between prehistory and civilization, a shift some researchers believe the academic world is reluctant to make. There is also the public dimension. Mu has long captured the imagination of people far beyond academic circles. Its story has been retold in novels, documentaries, and speculative history shows. It has inspired treasure hunters, alternative historians, and even spiritual movements. This cultural life gives Mu a resilience that scientific dismissal alone cannot extinguish. When a story resonates deeply, offering adventure, mystery, and the possibility of a hidden unity in human origins, it takes on a momentum of its own. Ironically, both sides sometimes rely on the same examples to make opposite points. Take the pyramids. Skeptics see them as proof of convergent development, with similar shapes arising independently for structural and ceremonial reasons. Believers see them as the hallmark of a shared architectural tradition spreading outward from Mu. Or consider the Moai of Easter Island. To archaeologists, they are a unique product of Rapa Nui culture. To those in the Mu camp, they are the last echo of a monumental art form born on a continent now gone. Where the two perspectives do overlap is in the acknowledgement that human history is still full of gaps. Even the most established timelines are constantly being revised in light of new discoveries. The uncovering of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a massive ceremonial complex built more than 11,000 years ago, forced archaeologists to reconsider the scale and sophistication of societies in the deep past. Sites like this prove that humans were capable of monumental architecture far earlier than previously thought, opening the door, at least a crack, to the idea that other advanced societies might have existed and been lost. This shared recognition of the unknown may be the only common ground in the debate over Mu. Skeptics see it as a reason to keep searching within established frameworks. Believers see it as permission to push those frameworks outward. Both, in their own way, are looking for the same thing: a clearer picture of where we came from. And so the conversation continues, moving in cycles, new claims, new criticisms, new reinterpretations. Each time a stone structure is found in unexpected depths, each time a genetic study reveals surprising ancient connections between populations, Mu's name surfaces again. For its supporters, these moments are hints that the legend holds some truth. For its critics, they are reminders of how easily the human mind can weave a grand story from scattered threads. In the end, the debate over Mu is less about settling a single historical question than about how we deal with the boundaries of knowledge. Do we demand proof before belief, or allow belief to guide the search for proof? Do we treat the absence of evidence as evidence of absence, or as a challenge to look harder? These are not questions unique to Mu. They are at the heart of every great mystery in human history. The next stage of our journey will look at how Mu has evolved not just as a hypothesis but as a cultural idea, how it has been reimagined, repurposed, and even absorbed into spiritual teachings far removed from Churchward's original vision. In that realm, Mu becomes less a lost continent and more a symbol, one that still exerts a pull over the imagination more than a century after it first entered the public mind. Over time, the story of Mu has transformed from a narrowly defined claim in Churchward's books into a cultural idea that has taken on a life of its own. While his original narrative focused on the Nacl tablets, a unified government, and a precise geographic location in the Pacific, later retellings have stretched and reshaped the legend to fit different purposes. In some cases, Mu has become an allegory for human unity. In others, a backdrop for science fiction and fantasy. Its fluidity is part of its endurance. It can be whatever the storyteller or believer needs it to be. By the mid-20th century, Mu had already begun to drift away from Churchward's strict framework. Writers of speculative history folded it into a larger network of lost continents, linking it with Atlantis in the Atlantic and Lemuria in the Indian Ocean. These imagined landmasses became the settings for epic prehistoric civilizations, each with advanced knowledge, spiritual wisdom, and the inevitable fate of destruction. In this expanded mythology, Mu was no longer just a motherland of human culture. It was one chapter in a global saga of rise and fall, a reminder that the world has been reshaped many times before recorded history began. Theosophy, a spiritual movement that emerged in the late 19th century, played a major role in this shift. Theosophists were fascinated by the idea of hidden ancient wisdom, preserved by secret masters, and occasionally revealed to humanity in times of need. In their cosmology, lost continents like Mu were not merely physical places but stages in the spiritual evolution of humanity. According to some theosophical writings, Mu, sometimes equated with Lemuria, was home to one of the root races, early forms of humanity that developed particular qualities before being replaced or transformed. In this version, the continent's destruction was not simply a geological event but a necessary step in the planet's spiritual progression. From there, Mu began to appear in even more varied contexts. In the realm of popular fiction, it became a setting for adventure tales, pulp novels, and later science fiction films. These stories often kept the broad strokes: a technologically advanced civilization in the distant past, a sudden catastrophe, scattered survivors, but altered the details to suit the plot. Some portrayed Mu as a utopia, others as a place of hubris and moral decay. In all cases, it served as an imaginative blank canvas, an exotic stage on which any kind of story could unfold. This adaptability has helped Mu survive in the public imagination even as academic interest has remained minimal. Unlike a rigid historical claim which can be disproven and discarded, a myth that shifts with the times can stay relevant indefinitely. When new archaeological discoveries are made, whether it's an ancient megalith, a submerged ruin, or a genetic link between distant populations, Mu can be invoked as a possible connection. When global events spark anxiety about climate change or rising seas, the story of a great civilization swallowed by the ocean becomes a cautionary tale. In the hands of some modern spiritual movements, Mu has been reimagined as a symbol of harmony with nature. Here, the Nikal are depicted as living in perfect balance with the earth, guided by principles of respect, cooperation, and ecological stewardship. Their destruction is framed not as divine punishment or random catastrophe, but as the result of breaking that balance, a moral lesson for the present. In these versions, the lost continent becomes a mirror held up to our own world, a warning that even the most advanced societies can fall if they ignore the limits of their environment. This symbolic reading does not require belief in Mu's literal existence. It treats the legend as a story about human potential and vulnerability. Much like the myth of Atlantis or the biblical flood, the power lies not in proving that the Nikal once walked the Pacific shores, but in imagining what it would mean if they had, and what it means for us now. In this way, Mu becomes a vessel for cultural reflection, carrying themes that resonate across generations. And yet, the literalist version of Mu has never entirely faded. Independent researchers continue to search for physical evidence, driven by a conviction that the legend is based on real events. They map submerged ridges, compare myths from distant islands, and analyze megalithic architecture for signs of a shared origin. Online communities trade theories and findings, blending serious investigation with more speculative leaps. In these circles, Mu is not just a metaphor, it is a puzzle to be solved. The coexistence of these two approaches, the symbolic and the literal, has created a curious dual life for Mu. In one world, it is a place of spiritual allegory and creative invention, changing shape to match the needs of each generation. In the other, it is a hypothesis under constant investigation, subject to the same demands for evidence that apply to any historical claim. Each feeds the other. The symbolic keeps the legend alive in popular culture, while the literal keeps the search active and the debate alive. This interplay mirrors the way myths have always worked. The Trojan War, for example, was long considered pure legend until archaeological evidence revealed that a city matching Troy's description had indeed existed. Even then, the war of Homer's Iliad, with its gods and epic duels, remained a blend of fact and fiction. Mu occupies a similar space, perhaps entirely imagined, perhaps rooted in some forgotten event, but in either case shaped and reshaped by centuries of retelling. In the end, the question of Mu's truth may be less important than the uses to which the story is put. It has been a tool for exploring human unity, a setting for adventure, a warning against environmental collapse, and a symbol of lost wisdom. Each version says more about the culture telling it than about any ancient civilization it might describe. And perhaps that is the final clue. The endurance of Mu tells us that we will always seek origins that connect us, stories that warn us, and mysteries that challenge us to look beyond the edges of the known world. From here, we will turn to one final provocative possibility, that even if Mu as Churchward described it never existed, it might still represent something real. A patchwork of ancient events, migrations, and disasters woven together over thousands of years into a single enduring legend. Understanding how such a synthesis could happen may bring us closer to the truth than either blind belief or outright dismissal ever could. If we strip away the layers of spiritual symbolism, pulp adventure, and speculative science that have built up around Mu, we are left with a but perhaps more intriguing possibility, that the legend is not the memory of a single great lost continent, but the fusion of many real events and places into one enduring narrative. This would not make Mu less interesting. In fact, it might explain why the story has proved so adaptable, capable of absorbing elements from different times and cultures while retaining its core identity. History is full of examples of myths that began as mosaics. The Greek story of Atlantis, for instance, may have drawn from memories of multiple disasters, volcanic eruptions in the Aegean, floods in North Africa, and even tales brought back from distant voyages. Over time, these separate events were condensed into the account recorded by Plato, a single, advanced civilization that fell in a single cataclysmic night. Something similar could have happened with Mu. Across the Pacific and its surrounding regions, there have been countless episodes of upheaval, volcanic explosions, earthquakes, tsunamis, and the slow drowning of coastal plains as glaciers melted. Each of these events would have generated its own local legends. As trade and migration spread these stories, they could have merged into a grander tale of a vast homeland lost to the sea. Archaeology supports at least part of this idea. In Southeast Asia, the submerged continental shelf known as Sundaland was once a vast expanse of land connecting what are now islands like Borneo, Sumatra, and Java. During the last ice age, it supported human populations who would have witnessed its gradual inundation as sea levels rose more than 300 feet. In the Bismarck Archipelago and other parts of Melanesia, oral traditions describe ancestral lands that sank beneath the waves, sometimes linked to moral lessons about hubris or the breaking of sacred laws. These accounts echo the moralized catastrophes told about Mu, even if they originated in entirely different places. The process of merging myths does not require written records. Human beings are natural storytellers, and when people from different islands, coasts, or trading hubs meet, they exchange more than goods. They trade histories. A voyager hearing of a drowned homeland in one place might connect it with a similar tale from their own culture, blending the details until the two become indistinguishable. Over generations, the merged version might shed its specific geography and become more universal. Our people once lived in a great land now beneath the sea. By the time Churchward heard of Mu, the original components of the story could have been centuries, even millennia, old. This fusion model also explains why elements of Mu's supposed legacy appear in so many different places. If the legend is built from multiple source events, then the architectural parallels, symbolic similarities, and shared myths would be real, but they would not point to a single place of origin. Instead, they would be the product of different societies reacting to similar environmental challenges, sometimes influencing each other through contact, sometimes arriving at the same solutions independently. In Churchward's interpretation, all these threads ran back to one root. In reality, they might be the record of a whole forest of ancient societies, some connected, some not, their stories braided together over time. This does not mean that Mu's details are meaningless. On the contrary, examining them can reveal the kinds of experiences that shaped early human memory. The emphasis on catastrophic flooding and sudden destruction, for example, reflects the real danger posed by tsunamis in the Pacific and Indian Oceans. The image of cities or islands sinking into the sea mirrors the fate of coastal settlements during periods of rapid sea level rise. Even the idea of a single mother civilization could reflect the way ancient people understood their world, with distant lands connected not by continuous territory but by shared seafaring networks and cultural exchange. It is also possible that part of the Mu narrative comes from real migrations. Genetic studies have shown that human populations moved between Asia, Oceania, and the Americas far earlier than previously believed. These migrations were not one-way journeys but ongoing exchanges with groups leaving and returning, carrying knowledge, tools, and traditions. In such a dynamic environment, it would be easy for the memory of where we came from to shift from a specific island or region to a generalized idea of a great ancestral homeland. One could argue that Churchward's error, if it was an error, lay in treating this generalized homeland as a literal continent with fixed borders. By doing so, he gave the legend a concreteness that made it vulnerable to geological criticism. But the adaptability of Mu in popular culture suggests that its power lies in its flexibility. As a symbol, it can represent any number of real places, real events, and real connections that shaped humanity before recorded history began. The synthesis theory also bridges the gap between believers and skeptics. For those who want Mu to be real, it allows the possibility that the legend is rooted in actual human experiences, even if not in a single landmass. For those who reject the idea of a lost Pacific continent, it offers a framework for understanding how such a story could arise and spread without requiring a rewriting of geology. In this way, Mu becomes less a disputed fact and more a shared field of inquiry, a mystery whose pieces belong to many cultures. There is, however, one more dimension to consider: the role of the listener. Myths are shaped not only by the events that inspire them, but by the needs and beliefs of those who hear them. A story about a drowned homeland might be told differently in a time of famine than in a time of prosperity. It might be emphasized as a moral warning in one generation, then as a tale of heroism and survival in another. When Churchward encountered the elements of the Mu story, he interpreted them through his own worldview, one shaped by the colonial era's fascination with lost races and the desire to find a single point of origin for human civilization. In a different listener's hands, the same fragments might have become a completely different legend. Understanding Mu as a mosaic does not diminish its value. In some ways, it enhances it, revealing the legend as a living archive of human memory, stitched together from the experiences of many peoples over thousands of years. This is why the search for Mu, whether on the ocean floor, in ancient texts, or in the shared symbols of distant cultures, continues to resonate. It is not just a search for a place, but for the connections that bind us across space and time. In the chapters ahead, we will look at how this mosaic theory plays out when applied to specific elements of the Mu legend, from the supposed architecture of the Nakil to their unifying government and spiritual beliefs. Whether these are literal memories or symbolic distillations of many traditions, they offer a fascinating glimpse into the deep currents of the human story. Currents that, like the ocean itself, flow far beyond the reach of our present maps. If the legend of Mu is indeed a mosaic, a blend of memories, migrations, and disasters, then its individual tiles are worth examining in detail. Each element of Churchward's account can be seen as a clue whether or not it points to a single lost continent. The descriptions of the Nakil's government, their unified religion, their architecture, and their mastery of navigation all deserve closer attention, because they echo patterns found in multiple ancient cultures, even if those cultures never shared a common homeland. Churchward claimed that Mu's people lived under a single central government, a concept that feels improbable when measured against most of recorded history. Large-scale political unity has always been difficult to maintain. Empires rise and fragment, alliances shift, and regional identities reassert themselves. But in the deep past, smaller, more cohesive populations could sometimes maintain remarkable levels of cooperation. In Polynesia, for example, island confederations were held together not by continuous territory, but by kinship ties, reciprocal trade, and shared ritual obligations. Leadership was often less about absolute authority and more about stewardship, a system in which chiefs or kings were expected to safeguard resources and maintain harmony among their people. The Nakil religion, as Churchward described it, centered on a belief in the interconnectedness of life, the earth, and the cosmos. This holistic worldview is not unique to Mu. It appears in some form in nearly every indigenous tradition. From the Andean concept of Aini, sacred reciprocity between humans and nature, to the Hawaiian principle of Pono, meaning balance and righteousness, ancient societies often linked spiritual health with environmental and social harmony. If the Mu legend draws on multiple cultural memories, the Nakil religion may represent the distilled essence of these beliefs, a symbolic placeholder for the idea that unity, not conquest, was the highest value. Architecture is another recurring theme in the legend and one of the most visible. Churchward spoke of great cities, monumental stonework, and advanced engineering techniques. Across the real-world Pacific and beyond, we see evidence of societies capable of extraordinary construction without modern machinery. The basalt column walls of Nan Madol, the coral block temples of Tonga, the Stone Mary of Tahiti, each shows the ability to work with local materials on a massive scale. While there is no direct evidence linking these to Mu, their existence proves that seafaring island cultures could undertake ambitious building projects, especially when those projects served both ceremonial and political purposes. The supposed maritime mastery of the picture. If there is one skill that could tie together distant cultures across thousands of miles, it is navigation. Oceanic voyaging requires more than just the ability to sail. It demands an intimate knowledge of weather patterns, star paths, and seasonal cycles, as well as the skill to read the subtle cues of the sea itself. Polynesian wayfinders, for instance, could detect the reflection of an island on the underside of clouds long before land was visible. Such knowledge, passed down orally and refined over generations, could spread widely if shared between voyaging cultures. If Mu was a symbolic amalgamation of many seafaring societies, its legendary fleets may represent the cumulative skill of centuries of ocean travel. One of the more intriguing aspects of Churchward's description is the Knockel's apparent lack of internal warfare. He presented Mu as a society that avoided large-scale conflict, focusing instead on cooperative achievement. While this may sound utopian, there are real-world examples of societies where warfare was minimal or ritualized rather than constant. Some Pacific Island cultures resolve disputes through highly structured competitions, dances, or gift exchanges, avoiding the destruction that comes with prolonged fighting. Archaeologists have also noted that in certain regions, fortifications and weapons appear only after population growth or environmental stress, suggesting that peaceful coexistence was possible under favorable conditions. However, the question remains, could such unity, even on a smaller scale, survive long enough to be remembered as the defining trait of a civilization? It is possible that this image of Mu reflects less an actual political reality and more a cultural ideal, the way a people wanted to see themselves, or the way later storytellers imagined their ancestors. Legends often preserve aspirations alongside memories, and the portrait of a harmonious Mu might be as much an expression of longing as of history. The unifying thread through all these elements, governance, religion, architecture, navigation, and peace, is the idea of balance. In the Mu narrative, everything works together. Politics serves the people. Religion connects them to the land and the cosmos. Engineering reflects both practicality and beauty, and travel spreads knowledge rather than conquest. This image, whether real or imagined, resonates deeply because it contrasts so sharply with much of recorded history, which is dominated by conflict, hierarchy, and exploitation. Mu becomes, in this sense, not just a lost civilization, but a lost possibility, a vision of what humanity might achieve if it could align its strengths rather than turn them against itself. From the mosaic perspective, each of these traits could have been drawn from different sources. The political unity might come from Polynesian confederations or Southeast Asian maritime kingdoms. The religion could be distilled from Andean, Oceanic, and Asian philosophies. The architecture could combine memories of Micronesian basalt works, Mesoamerican pyramids, and Southeast Asian stone temples. The navigation skills could be the legacy of countless voyagers from the Indian to the Pacific Ocean. When assembled into a single narrative, these pieces form the Knockel, a composite people embodying the highest achievements of many different societies. If that is the case, then the truth of Mu lies not in a single location waiting to be discovered, but in recognizing the shared human capacity for adaptation, creativity, and cooperation across vast distances. It suggests that ancient peoples were far more interconnected than we tend to assume, and that the boundaries between their worlds were more porous than the maps in our history books would suggest. Of course, for those who hold to the literal interpretation, the mosaic model will always feel like a compromise, an interesting theory, but one that robs Mu of its grandeur as a single towering civilization. And for strict skeptics, even the mosaic model may lean too heavily on coincidence and pattern-seeking. But between these extremes lies a fertile ground for exploration, where the search for Mu becomes the search for the deep roots of human connection. In the next part of our journey, we will examine one of the most debated aspects of the Mu legend, its supposed advanced technology. Whether this technology was literal, symbolic, or entirely imagined, it forms a critical part of the story, shaping how we imagine the capabilities and perhaps the downfall of this mysterious civilization. The idea of Mu's advanced technology has always been one of its most tantalizing and controversial aspects. Churchward described a civilization capable of achievements that, in some ways, rival or even surpass those of our own age. In his telling, the Naical harnessed energy from natural forces, built monumental structures with precision stonework, and navigated the vast Pacific with a mastery that would not be equaled for thousands of years. To believers, these claims elevate Mu from a prehistoric culture to a pinnacle of human ingenuity. To skeptics, they are embellishments without evidence, more fantasy than fact. But if we approach the question carefully, we can separate what might be plausible from what belongs entirely to the realm of legend. In Churchward's account, one of the Naicals' most significant achievements was their ability to tap into what he called primary forces, a kind of natural energy drawn from the earth itself. He described it as clean, abundant, and capable of powering their cities, machinery, and even vehicles. While this sounds fantastical, the notion of societies using ambient natural energy is not entirely alien to human history. Ancient peoples have long harnessed the power of wind, water, and the sun, though in ways far less advanced than what Churchward envisioned. It is possible that his descriptions of primary forces were inspired by older myths of sacred energy, such as the Polynesian concept of mana or the Chinese idea of qi, reinterpreted through a modern technological lens. The stone architecture of Mu, as imagined by Churchward and later writers, is another focal point of its supposed technological prowess. The Naical were said to work with massive blocks of stone, fitting them together so precisely that not even a blade could slip between them. This is a familiar theme in ancient mysteries, often invoked in discussions of Inca walls in Cusco, the megaliths of Baalbek, or the pyramids of Egypt. In the Pacific, too, there are examples of remarkable stone construction. The basalt columns of Nan Madol, the coral block temples of Tonga, and the stepped platforms of Easter Island. While modern archaeology explains these feats as the product of skilled labor, clever engineering, and generations of accumulated knowledge, the sheer precision and scale can still inspire speculation about techniques we no longer fully understand. Navigation may be the most credible of Mu's supposed technological triumphs. We know beyond doubt that Pacific Islanders developed sophisticated methods for long-distance voyaging without modern instruments. Polynesian wayfinders read the stars, swells, and cloud patterns with a level of expertise that allowed them to traverse thousands of miles of open ocean and arrive exactly where they intended. If Mu represents a composite of many seafaring cultures, its legendary fleets could be a symbolic tribute to this collective mastery. Even today, the revival of traditional wayfinding in places like Hawaii and Micronesia demonstrates how powerful and effective these ancient methods remain. Churchward also spoke of Mu's written language, supposedly preserved in the Cradle tablets. He claimed it was a highly developed script, capable of expressing complex ideas and recording scientific knowledge. While no physical tablets have ever been verified, the idea of an advanced writing system in prehistory is not implausible in itself. The discovery of early scripts like the Indus Valley symbols or the Rongorongo glyphs of Easter Island reminds us that writing has emerged in diverse forms and, in some cases, been lost entirely. If Mu's script ever existed, its disappearance could be explained by the destruction of the society and the scattering of its survivors, though without tangible evidence, this remains conjecture. One of the more extravagant claims about Mu's technology involves transportation. Churchward suggested that the Cradle may have used flying machines or other advanced vehicles. This is where the story veers sharply into the speculative. While myths of flight are common across cultures, from the chariots of the Hindu gods to the feathered serpents of Mesoamerica, they are generally interpreted as symbolic rather than literal. It is tempting to see these as echoes of real technologies, but without artifacts or engineering evidence, such ideas remain in the realm of legend. Even if we strip away the more fantastical elements, the picture that remains is still impressive. A maritime culture with advanced navigation, monumental architecture, a possibly sophisticated symbolic system, and a worldview that integrated science, spirituality, and environmental stewardship. This is a vision that resonates because it combines the tangible achievements of known ancient cultures with the inspiring possibility that there is more to our past than we currently understand. The question then is whether these achievements belong to one society or to many, later woven together into the fabric of the Mu legend. From the mosaic perspective, Mu's technology could be a distillation of centuries of human innovation across the Pacific and surrounding regions. The energy of the earth might recall the spiritual forces described in Polynesian, Asian, and Andean traditions. The precise stonework could draw on memories of megalithic sites from multiple islands. The navigation expertise could reflect the cumulative skills of countless voyagers who crisscrossed the ocean long before Europeans arrived. Skeptics argue that by attributing these achievements to a single vanished civilization, we risk erasing the individual histories of the cultures that actually accomplished them. The real builders of Nan Madol, the navigators of Hawaii, the temple architects of Tonga. These are people whose legacies deserve recognition in their own right. Folding them into the myth of Mu might create a grander story, but it also distorts the reality of their achievements. Believers counter that such similarities across distant places still demand explanation. Independent invention is possible, but when architectural styles, symbolic motifs, and navigation techniques align across thousands of miles, it is reasonable to ask whether there was a deeper connection. For them, Mu provides a unifying theory, a way to link scattered pieces into a coherent whole, even if the physical evidence remains elusive. In the end, the discussion of Mu's technology mirrors the larger debate about the legend itself. It is a balancing act between wonder and rigor, between honoring the achievements of known cultures and leaving open the possibility that we have only glimpsed part of the human story. Whether Mu's technology was literal, symbolic, or a mix of both, it has served for over a century as a reminder that our ancestors may have been far more capable and far more connected than we give them credit for. In the next stage, we will explore perhaps the most emotionally charged part of the Mu legend, its destruction. This is the moment that turns a thriving civilization into a mystery, the event that takes it from the realm of history into the realm of loss. Whether seen as a sudden catastrophe or a slow drowning, the fall of Mu is what gives the legend its enduring poignancy and its warning. Every great legend of a lost civilization shares one central moment: the fall. It is the scene that turns memory into myth, the event that explains why a place of such splendor no longer exists. For Atlantis, it was a single night of earthquakes and floods. For Lemuria, it was a slow descent beneath the Indian Ocean. For Mu, the accounts vary, but they all point to a cataclysm of unimaginable scale, an event that erased a continent and scattered its people to the winds. Churchward described Mu's destruction as both sudden and total. In his telling, volcanic upheavals ripped open the Earth's crust, causing the entire landmass to sink beneath the Pacific. This was not a gradual process but an apocalyptic event. Cities swallowed whole, mountains collapsing into the sea, and millions of people lost within days. It is a scene drawn with almost cinematic detail, and for many who first encountered the story, it was this vision of overwhelming disaster that left the deepest mark. From a geological standpoint, the notion of an entire continent vanishing in such a short time is difficult to reconcile with what we know about plate tectonics. Land masses do not simply drop into the mantle. Instead, they are broken apart and reshaped over millions of years. Yet this does not mean that ancient peoples could not have experienced catastrophes on a scale that felt like the end of the world. Tsunamis, massive earthquakes, and volcanic eruptions can devastate entire regions in hours. For those living in coastal cities or island communities, such events could indeed erase entire landscapes from memory within a generation. The Pacific is home to the Ring of Fire, a chain of tectonic boundaries that produces the most intense seismic and volcanic activity on Earth. Along this ring, islands can be created or destroyed within decades, and undersea earthquakes can trigger waves that cross oceans. Historical records from the last few centuries describe eruptions and quakes that wiped out whole settlements. The 1883 eruption of Krakatoa, for example, obliterated more than 160 villages and sent shockwaves around the globe. For a population without modern science, the destruction of Mu could easily have been understood and remembered as the sudden disappearance of an entire homeland. There is also the possibility of slow destruction. As the last ice age ended, melting glaciers caused sea levels to rise dramatically, over 300 feet in some regions. Coastal plains became seabeds and low-lying islands vanished. For people whose lives were tied to the shore, the retreat of the land might have felt like the ocean itself was swallowing the world. Over centuries, stories of this slow drowning could merge with accounts of sudden disasters, creating a single narrative of catastrophic loss. In many Pacific cultures, flood myths hold a prominent place in oral tradition. Some speak of great waves that came without warning, others of islands sinking beneath storms, and still others of gods or spirits punishing humanity for disobedience. These myths often serve a dual purpose. They preserve memories of real events and convey moral lessons. In the case of Mu, Churchward portrayed the destruction as both a natural disaster and a moral reckoning, a civilization undone by its own arrogance and the breaking of its sacred laws. This framing gives the story a resonance that goes beyond geology, tapping into a universal human theme, the belief that hubris invites downfall. Even today, the image of Mu's destruction resonates because it mirrors anxieties of our own time. Rising seas, changing climates, and increasingly severe natural disasters remind us that human achievements, no matter how advanced, are never immune to the forces of nature. In that sense, Mu becomes not just a relic of the past, but a warning to the present. Survivor legends form the bridge between Mu's destruction and its supposed influence on later cultures. Churchward claimed that small groups escaped the catastrophe, traveling by sea to the Americas, Asia, and other parts of the Pacific. These survivors carried with them fragments of their knowledge, architecture, agriculture, navigation, and religious beliefs, which they shared with the peoples they encountered. This idea offers a convenient explanation for similarities between distant civilizations, but it also fits with what we know about human migration. After disasters, people move. They bring their skills, their stories, and their ways of seeing the world to new lands, where these elements blend with local traditions. From the Mosaic perspective, this part of the legend may be closer to reality than the image of an entire continent vanishing overnight. If Mu is a composite of many cultures, then the survivors could represent the historical reality of voyaging peoples spreading ideas and technologies across the Pacific and beyond. The destruction would then be a metaphor for the breaking apart of a once-connected network, rather than the literal sinking of a single landmass. What makes the destruction of Mu so compelling is its finality. There is no return, no hope of reclaiming the lost land. This absence gives the story a certain gravity. It is not just about what was lost, but about the permanence of that loss. In this way, Mu becomes an emotional landscape as much as a physical one. It embodies the human experience of irreversible change, the knowledge that some things, once gone, cannot be restored. And yet, even in this finality, the legend leaves a thread of continuity. The survivors, the fragments of knowledge, the traces in architecture and myth. This duality, total destruction alongside enduring influence, is part of why the story has lasted. It allows for both mourning and pride, loss and legacy. From a narrative standpoint, the destruction of Mu serves as the pivot on which the entire legend turns. It explains why such a great civilization is gone, why its memory survives only in fragments, and why its influence must be sought in the scattered echoes of other cultures. It also provides a dramatic backdrop for the enduring question: if Mu was real, could it happen again? In the next part, we will follow that thread of survival, exploring how the supposed refugees of Mu might have shaped the cultures they encountered, and how those cultures, in turn, may have preserved fragments of the lost continent's memory in their own traditions. Whether these connections are historical fact, symbolic resonance, or a mix of both, they form the living legacy of Mu, a shadow that still stretches across the Pacific and beyond. The survivors of Mu, whether literal refugees from a single catastrophic event or symbolic stand-ins for the carriers of many ancient traditions, are the crucial link between the vanished homeland and the wider world. Without them, the story of Mu would be little more than a cautionary tale about the fragility of civilizations. With them, it becomes a story of endurance, adaptation, and the transmission of knowledge across vast distances. Churchward painted these survivors as skilled navigators, architects, and philosophers who spread out in small fleets, settling in the Americas, Asia, and the islands of the Pacific. Each landing, he claimed, left behind traces of Mu's culture, faint but enduring, woven into the fabric of local traditions. From the perspective of migration history, This idea fits comfortably with what we know about human behavior in the wake of disaster. When a homeland becomes uninhabitable, whether due to environmental change, war, or famine, people move. They take with them what they can carry, not only in material goods but in skills, languages, and beliefs. Archaeological evidence shows that even in prehistory, humans were capable of extraordinary voyages. The settlement of remote islands in Polynesia, thousands of miles from the nearest continental shore, is one example. The crossing into the Americas via the Bering Land Bridge, or possibly earlier coastal routes, is another. The survivors of Mu, real or imagined, could easily fit into this long tradition of human resilience. Churchward and later writers pointed to specific similarities between distant cultures as evidence of Mu's influence. The step pyramids of Mesoamerica, the stone platforms of Polynesia, and the terraced fields of Southeast Asia were all cited as echoes of a shared architectural heritage. The decorative motifs found in textiles, pottery, and carvings, spirals, sunbursts, and stylized waves, were likewise interpreted as remnants of Mu's artistic language. While mainstream archaeology often explains these similarities as independent inventions shaped by similar needs and environments, the legend invites a more connected view that some part of these resemblances may be the result of ideas carried by voyaging peoples across oceans. Religious and philosophical parallels add another layer to the argument. In Churchward's reconstruction, the Nico religion emphasized harmony between humanity, nature, and the cosmos. Traces of this worldview can be found in many indigenous traditions. The Andean reverence for Pachamama, Mother Earth, the Polynesian concept of mana as a life force permeating all things, the balance-seeking principles of East Asian philosophy. Are these similarities the result of shared origin, convergent thought, or a mix of both? For believers in Mu, the answer is clear. These are the cultural fingerprints of a single, enlightened civilization. From a mosaic standpoint, the survivor story works just as well without a single point of origin. If Mu is a fusion of many real societies, then the survivors could simply represent the countless exchanges of people and knowledge that occurred throughout the prehistoric Pacific and beyond. A navigator from one island might bring new agricultural techniques to another. A group displaced by volcanic activity might introduce new architectural forms to their adopted home. Over time, such movements would create a network of shared ideas with no single source but a rich and interconnected heritage. The challenge in tracing such influences lies in separating genuine connections from coincidental resemblance. A spiral motif carved into a temple wall in Polynesia may look like one in Mesoamerica, but without clear evidence of contact, we cannot assume a direct link. And yet, the persistence of these patterns in the Mu narrative speaks to a deeper human tendency. We seek connections. We are drawn to the idea that the scattered pieces of our past might fit together into a larger, more unified story. Oral traditions play a key role in this process. Across the Pacific, myths tell of ancestral homelands far across the sea, of voyages guided by the stars, and of knowledge bestowed by gods or culture heroes who arrived from elsewhere. In some cases, these stories preserve memories of real migrations. In others, they serve as symbolic frameworks for explaining the origins of a people. Either way, they form a bridge between lived history and the imagined grandeur of Mu. Churchward's version of the survivor tale also carried a moral undertone. The refugees, he suggested, did not simply bring their knowledge to new lands. They also carried the lessons of Mu's downfall. In this way, they became not just teachers, but warners, reminding future generations of the need to live in harmony with the earth and with each other. Whether or not this is historically accurate, it transforms the survivors from mere wanderers into bearers of a cultural mission, one that resonates with the broader theme of civilizations rising and falling in cycles. Modern interpretations of the survivor narrative sometimes take a more symbolic approach. In these versions, the survivors are not a literal group of people, but a metaphor for the endurance of human ideas. Even when a society is destroyed, its knowledge can persist, carried in the minds of travelers, preserved in stories, embedded in art and architecture. This view aligns with how cultural transmission works in the real world. Innovations, beliefs, and artistic styles can leap across vast distances and centuries, surviving long after their original context has been lost. From this perspective, the survivors of Mu are with us still. Their descendants are the navigators who kept traditional way-finding alive, the architects who built monumental works with nothing but hand tools, the storytellers who kept the memory of drowned lands alive in song and chant. In this way, Mu's legacy becomes less about a vanished place and more about an ongoing thread in the human story, a reminder that the past is never entirely gone, only transformed. By the time the Mu legend reached the 20th and 21st centuries, the survivor motif had taken on yet another form. It became a tool for imagining alternative histories. Writers, filmmakers, and game designers have used Mu as a launching point for worlds in which its refugees founded new civilizations, influenced the course of known history, or even survived in hidden enclaves to present day. In these retellings, the survivors are no longer just remnants of a lost world. They are agents of change, shaping the future as much as they are shaped by the past. As we move into the final part of this journey, we will return to the central question that has physical evidence but in the meaning the legend holds. For those who believe, for those who doubt, and for those who simply find in it a reflection of humanity's deepest hopes and fears. The story of Mu may be a record of actual events, a symbolic mosaic, or a purely imaginative creation, but whatever its origin, it has endured for more than a century in modern consciousness, and perhaps for thousands of years before that in the stories of the sea. Its survivors, real, imagined, or metaphorical, have ensured that Mu itself, even in absence, refuses to sink. In the end, the question that has followed us through every chapter of this exploration refuses to resolve into a simple yes or no. Was Mu real? The answer depends on what we mean by real. If we define it as a single, vast continent in the Pacific, populated by a unified civilization whose achievements eclipsed those of its time, then the geological evidence is unforgiving. Plate tectonics, ocean floor mapping, and the study of continental crust tell us that such a landmass could not have vanished in the manner described by James Churchward. The Pacific's islands are volcanic peaks and coral atolls, not the surviving tips of a drowned continent. In that sense, the literal Mu, the one imagined as an Atlantis of the Pacific, may never have existed. But myths do not endure for centuries or millennia simply because they are false. They endure because they capture something essential about our fears, our desires, and the patterns of history we have seen repeated. Viewed through the lens of the mosaic theory, Mu becomes less a single place and more a convergence point for many real events and cultures. The flooding of Sundaland, the migrations of seafaring peoples, the destruction wrought by Pacific earthquakes and tsunamis, the shared symbols and architectural styles that echo across thousands of miles. In this form, Mu is as real as the collective memory that created it. For believers, the absence of proof is not proof of absence. The oceans still hide vast tracts of unexplored terrain, and history is full of surprises. New archaeological discoveries have overturned long-standing assumptions before. It is not impossible that evidence might one day surface that forces us to rethink the deep past. For skeptics, the persistence of the Mu legend despite the lack of physical evidence is itself a lesson, one about the human appetite for grand narratives and our willingness to connect dots across space and time, even when the lines between them are uncertain. What both sides can agree on is that the story of Mu has shaped modern imagination in ways far beyond the original claims. It has inspired novelists, filmmakers, spiritual seekers, and amateur archaeologists. It has drawn attention to the rich traditions of Pacific and coastal peoples, sometimes misrepresenting them, but also sparking interest in their histories. In a way, Mu's greatest legacy may be that it encourages curiosity, prompting people to look at maps, study ancient cultures, and imagine connections that cross oceans. There is also the deeper, more personal appeal of Mu, the dream of a golden age. In Churchward's version, Mu was a place of peace, unity, and enlightenment, where technology served humanity rather than dominating it, and where harmony with nature was not an ideal, but a lived reality. Whether or not such a place ever existed, it offers a vision of what might be possible. In that sense, Mu functions as a mirror. It reflects both our longing for a better world and our recognition that such worlds are fragile. The destruction of Mu, sudden, total, and irreversible, gives the legend its emotional weight. It is the reminder that nothing, no matter how great, is immune to change. Civilizations can rise to astonishing heights, but they are still bound by the same natural laws and environmental limits as any other living system. In this way, the story of Mu resonates with other great cycles of history: the fall of Rome, the collapse of the Maya, the decline of the Khmer Empire. Each leaves behind ruins and questions, and each carries its own lessons about resilience and vulnerability. From a modern perspective, the Mu legend can even be read as an environmental parable. Whether we imagine its destruction as a sudden cataclysm or a slow drowning, the cause lies in a breakdown of balance between humanity and the forces of nature. In our own time, as sea levels rise and climate patterns shift, the idea of a lost land swallowed by the ocean feels less like fantasy and more like a warning. Perhaps this is one reason the story has remained compelling. It speaks to the precariousness of our present as much as to the mystery of our past. In the vastness of the Pacific, there are still places where the line between myth and history blurs. Oral traditions recall events that science has only recently confirmed, such as volcanic eruptions, meteor impacts, and migrations across open water. It is entirely possible that fragments of truth lie hidden within the Mu narrative, not in the form of a single vanished continent, but in the memories of real lands lost, real people scattered, and real achievements forgotten. These fragments may never be enough to prove Mu in the way Churchward imagined it, but they may still tell us something valuable about who we are and where we came from. Ultimately, whether we see Mu as fact, fiction, or something in between, its story is a testament to the power of human imagination. It is the kind of story that refuses to sink, resurfacing in new forms, reinterpreted by each generation to suit its own hopes and fears. For some, it is a mystery to be solved. For others, a myth to be honored. For many, It is simply a good story, one that carries us out across the open ocean to a place just beyond the horizon. In closing, perhaps the most important thing about Mu is not whether it was real, but what it represents. It is the idea that human history might be deeper, more complex, and more interconnected than we know. It is the suggestion that across the millennia, people have reached out across vast distances, shared ideas, and built worlds together, only to lose them again, leaving us to wonder what might have been. And it is the reminder that, in the end, all civilizations are temporary. But the human drive to remember, to tell stories, and to imagine new possibilities is not. So the legend remains, carried like a current through time. Somewhere between the deep trenches and high ridges of the Pacific seafloor, between the oral traditions of islanders and the theories of explorers, between the skepticism of science and the faith of dreamers, Mu still floats. Not as a place we can sail to, but as a map in the mind, a reminder that there is always more to discover, and that sometimes the most enduring truths are the ones we can never quite touch.